Well, all rights reserved. The author and publishers reserve their rights of translation and reproduction. Les Demoiselles Goubert Mours de Paris, by Jean Moréas and Paul Adam Jean Moréas. Paul Adam de Ladies, Goubert, Paris Manners, Paris Trestock, publishers 8, 9, 10, 11, Gallery of the French Theatre, 1886. Works. This volume was deposited at the Ministry of the Interior Library Section in November 1886. By the same authors, the theatre at Miranda. Auai, a Jew, a resurrection, Anwar, a Jew. In preparation, the paraphrase of the Gospels. Works by Jean Moréas, Lilies, Canticles. Myself. Works by Paul Adam. Soft Flesh. Dijon, Durantier Printing House, 65 Rue Chabot-Charny. 10 copies of this work were printed on Dutch paper, numbered at the press. Constantly the leg moves, and the toes wiggle the sheet. In the mahogany bed with iron slats, under the crimson curtains drawn back, Mr. Goubert lies agonizing, all violet from apoplexy spasms. A hoarse rasping rises, thick and choking in the narrowing throat. The coppery light of the lamp explores the tapestry and its golden florals, the icy touch of expensive fabrics, the sparkling frames of mirrors. Over the chaos of things, a silent dread, a gathering of anticipation. It's terrifying. Then the doctor turns and, walking towards Mr. Fracey, who stands in a corner of the room, he leads him to the library. One must expect anything. And his daughters. The doctor gestures vaguely with his arms. His attention then fixes on Mr. Fracey's anxious face. This gray-haired gentleman, impeccably dressed in an English jacket and a high collar, seems to be suffering from an intimate sorrow rarely seen among the simple friends of the dying. And his daughters? Fine wrinkles ripple within the frame of his receding gray hair, shaped into a sharp-pointed beard. Oh, is she wad do? Tanwanem tur. Be, a whirl, kamwer, a ratio, bisel and jewel, a rowerly ba. Sitting side by side, one older than the other. The eldest, very pale, staring with her cold eyes at the rose patterns on the carpet. The cadet weeps with round tears, and the tears gem her blonde flowing hair on her pale face. Ruined. Their father was ruined. That's what's killing him today. Mr. Fracey recounts the crash. He explains how all of his friend Goubert's fortune disappeared. Unfatigable, he speaks with a recitation of numbers. And all this tumbles quickly from his trembling lips. With a gesture, he animates himself, offering flat white hands adorned with large gold circles on his slender fingers. Since the young girls absolutely refuse to go out, they are seated at the end of the room. A terror repels them from their beds, a fear of illness, an apprehension of seeing that purple face again and being afraid of it. Anxious, Marceline, the elder, watches the movements of the doctor, still hoping that this young man with the gentle face will reassure her with a sign. She envisions a chaos of calamities. What was she to do alone? Since her mother's death, she's been solely responsible for household affairs. The first to grasp the irreparable loss of their fortune, her sister, a child. And Mrs. Fracey arrives, a small, thin woman, unattractive, very spry in her black dress. After embracing both young girls, she speaks with the doctor. Marceline sees her shrug and nod. You must both come with me to your room. You cannot stay here any longer. The sharp features of Mrs. Fracey tighten severely. Little Henriette persists, still crying. We will bleed him. He must not be distracted by you during the operation. First, do you trust Mr. Fracey and me, my dears? Affectionately, Mrs. Fracey pushes them towards the door. Perceived, the face of the apoplectic man who is gasping, and his terrifyingly pale, bulging eyes. At 7 in the morning, Mr. Goubert died. Immediately, Mrs. Fracey covered the table with damask napkins. She set up a crucifix and candelabras. In a marine conch that reads, Memory of Arcachon, she poured holy water and dipped a sprig of boas. Assisted by her maid, she sewed a wide lace ruffle to a chiffre coverlet, and the very pale head of the corpse seemed to sleep peacefully under the dancing illumination of the candles. At daybreak, the knickknacks disappeared into the cabinets. The Henri III chairs were covered with covers. The room took on a liturgical air of mourning with its prayer desks placed right next to the mortuary bed, next to the linens that held the crimson, reflections of the drapes in their shadows. The window was slightly opened, and the December breeze licked the flames that sometimes shot horizontally. The veiled paintings in crepe, large black stains on the gilded walls, the dead man's gray fingers, and his gleaming joined nails, held an ivory cross and some buis. A very young nun, cute as a button in her chair, murmurs prayers. Often she slips her gloved hands into the wide sleeves of her burlap robe, which freezes them. Now memories assail Marceline, the recall of constant kindnesses and gifts, pleasant taunts from father. And added to this, in her mind, is the dread of ruin. Ugly dresses, work, the master. The nun comes to speak to her, a whispered voice urging her to be brave. Through crowded rooms, intimates, people barely seen before between quadrilles. Servants ask Marceline for orders she no longer knows how to give. And every embrace, every sign of pitiful sympathy reminds her of the imminent poverty. In sobs she bursts out, "How sad you are, my poor child." Marceline shows a flower cross model. She reproaches herself for mourning her lost possessions as much as her father's death, and this ignites a searing rage at not being able to overcome this vile obsession. Mrs. Friese interjects and asks the florist to come back an hour later. "It was quite expensive, my child, that crown." "No, 100 francs. 100 francs. It's dear. One must learn to calculate." "I know. Your financial position is no longer the same." "You're right." She understands everything they wanted to teach her. "She calculates like a man," the husband says. Mrs. Friese softens, constantly repeating, "Is she reasonable? The poor little thing, is she reasonable?" "Father used to get me used to it. So we can talk," Marceline hopes Mr. Friese's face shows. She has no other recourse but him. Her father's parents, small Provençal rentiers, she knows are incapable of helping her. They won't even come to the funeral due to the cost of the trip. The mother's family is gone. With a single figure, the merchant outlines the situation. Whether Marceline accepts or refuses the inheritance, the bankruptcy of the union will devour everything. To avoid trouble, it would be wise to sign a waiver. Now you must live, your sister and you. Here's what I propose. I will take both of you into my store. You will be my cashier at 200 francs per month. Henriette will handle the delivery of goods and supervise the embroiderers. She will earn 100 francs. With 300 francs you can get by. And, of course, here with us is your home, you know. Oh, my dear, you know how much I love you." The lady throws herself at the young girl. Mr. Friese shakes her hand in the English manner. Marceline surrenders to their caresses and cries. She cries for the past, her father, her servants, her red landau. In the shop on the Avenue de l'Opéra, she imagines counting change at the green and ebony counter. They predict a rosy future, an association when the little Friese sisters are married in 10 years' time. After all, business is booming. Or perhaps some brave boys, a traveler, a cashier, a top student from the Louvre, will be only too happy to marry women like them. Their salaries will surely be increased. And Mrs. Friese keeps coming back to her idea of probable marriages, repeating, "A traveler, a cashier." The nun enters. She declares herself transfixed and brings her wax-like hands close to the fire. "Even despite the cold, the corpse is decomposing," she says. Mr. Friese goes to see. The women gather around Henriette. Marceline seeks his opinion on the Friese proposal. The little one, awake in her white muslin bed with blue satin trimmings, has huge tears in her lashes. Her delicate hand protrudes from the wide shirt in fine embroidered batiste. The milky room is illuminated by the snow that has been falling since the morning. The announcement of the ruin did not greatly disturb her. With her father dead, it seemed natural that everything should be changed. Mrs. Friese explains at length. Henriette thanks, very pleased. A joy from her 15th birthday with a little hope of playing the merchant. And then the freedom of these little workers, so merry in the streets, tempts her. Moreover, she would earn money. A sudden respect for herself for that. Oh, under moi. Oh, why? Our world day, can well. Our way, and we're Jew, and telling elder. The stream of people does not cease. Friends of Mr. Goubert, well-to-do and sympathetic, with new reading goats, enter cautiously. They shake Marceline's hand with a deep bow. Then, for a moment, with their hands on the brims of their hats, they contemplate the bloated face of the dead man. Discreetly, they inquire about the exact time of death. When they judge the visit long enough, they bid farewell and leave silently. Soon it becomes a crowd, around 5 o'clock, after the stock market. All pass before Marceline prostrated in her regretful pain. All, at the yellowish flames of the burning chapel, around the veil of the nun, for an instant, are illuminated. A flood flows. Others, introduced by the domestic in a black habit and white-gloved. People look at her and speak to each other. Entangled in mourning with a wide ribbon of sighs, her large blue-red eyes a little, and her pale, quivering mouth with tears, Henriette appears. The sharp air from outside cuts like blades. A curl, a downward doing, and flowers you at bay. Be, ice, mile way, oro, and consor. Marceline contemplates the adornment of the boudoir where she withdrew. Especially in a corner, the white felt hat and its golden easel and silks, a marvel from the confectioner. Deceptive flowers fill the satin-pink coif, and suspected at the bottom are dragées. Never again such gifts. Useful greetings will be served to her now. The lithographer brings the announcements. Everyone settles down before a small table. Mrs. Fraser will call the names from the register to the addresses. Her husband will write down the subscriptions, as per Marceline's suggestion. Mrs. Fraser, with her pleasant voice, calls out, Mr. and Mrs. Rondeau, 35, Rue du Sentier. Yes, sighs the young girl. There you go, Mr. Fraser confirms. Mr. and Mrs. Bresson, Rue des Herbes, no, 3, Limoges. Mr. and Mrs. Leverrier, 44, Boulevard Sebastopol, daughter. Mr. Givel, Lieutenant, 7th Soavis, Mostaganem, Algeria. Marceline already fastens a white bow tie, a small white plastron, under the deep neckline of her black corsage. A muslin wraps its whiteness from the ice. Long is the marble white toilet, where, among pots and bottles, sit curved basins. In the room adorned with cheap blue and green tapestry, the grandeur of the furniture is noted by the white felt hat, a confectioner's marvel, and its golden easel, silks, and painted flowers. The sheet sets are also white. Well, I can't find my comb anymore. Where did you put it? Tell me, demands Henriette. No, let's look. I don't use your things. There it is, little fool, she replies. Marceline shrugs her shoulders. Oh, how foolish I am. Although she knows these troubles without malice, they grieve her. And as she lives in the regret of a better past, any minor inconvenience, a carelessness from her sister, adds to her melancholy. But the torment of forcing herself to do the cleaning, and its miserable details distracts her painfully. She quickly discards this stagnation of her gloomy soul, a calm where she remembers old joys and savors the bitterness of no longer being able to hope for them. On the table, bought second-hand with the 6 faux old oak chairs, she spreads out the stained napkin. Through the window, the Rue de Sèvres and its yellow convent walls, umbrellas in the gray rain. In a way, the bleak landscape penetrates Marceline. With the snack finished, the two sisters put on their coats, retroussed their skirts for departure. Due to lack of other communication between the room and the kitchen, the stout maid passes by, laughing in her protective manner, a broom and a duster in her hands. Henriette brightens up. How are you? Morning, and wind, I cheed, old Joan. Oh, I will. How in England, how we Joan, Canary, and gonna see, and shooting, and the rain stops. The darkened sidewalks shine. They head down Rue du Bac, Port. Henriette does not read sadness into her sister's silence. She assumes that all people who are not as young as herself are naturally grumpy and serious, out of pride. Amidst the crowd of workers, a murmur fills the air. Gentlemen browse their newspapers while walking. Sometimes they stop at the edge of the sidewalk to study passages in depth. Muddy trousers, faces shaved blue, red hands reaching out for explanations. The excesses of the latest fashion clash with the spines of mature girls. From their croups dance the cushions of the turns. Marceline suffers from being equal in this world that causes by letting go plebeian gestures. With subtle giggles of a well-brought-up little girl, Henriette mocks. They are both eyed with hierarchical reverence for their first miss-like attitudes, at least. Beyond Rue du Bac, the very wide path is shadowed by bridges. The shrill chatter suddenly fades away, lost in the void. No. In the distance, the opera's crown, a few golds among the violet masts. Between the yellow quays, the Seine curves a swell against the shuttered boats of the laundries. From its green, pulsating skin, scattered with sparse silverings, the grayish-blue mist, Notre Dame the palace, the toothed pinnacle of Saint-Jacques Tower. In the shops, clerks drape fabrics. Marceline and Henriette stop at the store. The front door is painted black lacquer. Along the cornice, the name Fraisse is written in all capital English letters. Simple gold on mat, in solid and outline. Behind the display window, silk shades signed with the name in red are lowered. They enter. Mr. Fraisse, already well-dressed, stands up to greet them. He shows Marceline to a seat and speaks clearly, articulating each syllable. He bends down to pick up a heavy green leather-bound volume with nickel corners on the spine. Sometimes he takes out a fine handkerchief from his jacket pocket and gently blows his nose, then repositions his wire-frame glasses in front of his slightly tired eyes. She begins to write in her delicate calligraphy, reminiscent of embroidery on vellum. In the workshop, Henriette selects the shade of Girls from spools for an armorial passementary. "Beware the boss," Marguerite hints as she threads her needle. At the funny tales of a redhead whose rounded gesture dispenses, the embroiderers laugh. The 4 embroiderers work on a piece of velvet. The fabric, rolled at both ends over the posts of a frame, leaves a central band stretched where they stitch 4 paradise birds. "There's no risk he'll move," Henriette informs. "He balances with my sister." And laughter. "You're delightfully stupid, you first," interrupts Henriette. "Ho ho, he balances with his sister," exclaims Leontine, a dark-haired woman squashed. "You don't understand anything about the things in the box. So you laugh like carp." The young girl prided herself on commanding such well-dressed ladies, dressed in the latest fashion. In black or brown, with their high collars held steady by rigid ruffles, they worked with the tips of their fingers, performing elegant little gestures and adopting sweet expressions under the shadow of their regular curls. In order that she be forgiven for inevitable troubles, of which her authority as supervisor nonetheless benefited, Henriette tolerated freedom of speech. She herself found amusement in feigning understanding of sealed mysteries to her innocence, afraid of appearing inferior in any way. Through confidences, intimacy revealed delicate parts and young gentlemen donors. She abstained from questioning certain expressions. People would make fun of her. Thus, Henriette experienced love through its external pleasures. A luxury of amusements and parties, family caresses, carriage rides, meals at restaurants, theater tickets. But words still lingered in her mind, with a hope of understanding their meaning. Mr. Fraisse entered. He went from one to another with kindness. The fat Leontine stopped him, asking for his opinion. She tried mincing words. He smiled. "Henriette, will you come do the display?" "Yes, sir." "I nourish you. Casual or banal. I'll weigh him, and when do, when we're out, and what sentence show. Anyway, well, anyway. The boy in the olive uniform piled fabrics on the couch. A whole jewelry store fused into velvet, plushes, and silks, trickles flowing into the depths of the pleats. Crests of light under Mr. Fraisse's quick thumb. Gray colors resembling lead, crusty garnets like congealed blood. He tiptoes in with his pointed booties, coming and going. He adjusts. For Henriette, these fabrics hold tinted flavors, like velvet candies. I would Gerald, the Dunwell, and more. How? Wise. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Henriette," asked Marguerite, "that you remain wise?" "Yes." "Have you never had a lover?" "Really?" "Ah, leave me alone. It's good for you to have such thoughts." Clemence laughs. "As proud as you are." The other two, who were quietly chatting, raise their heads. What does she keep laughing at? Nothing. Shut up first, commanded Henriette. After that, the boss will catch us if you haven't finished. You know we need to finish before lunch, and it's already 1:15. As for you, Marguerite, you'll see. And she pointed her finger at him threateningly. Then suddenly burst out laughing at the memory of the silly question. Until noon, she contemplated this peaceful future. She would definitely have a lover one day, but for marriage like Mrs. Freysa, and then she would own a country house in Asnières, and her husband would be an associate of Mr. Freysa, Marceline's husband's partner. She saw herself with an umbrella on the porch of her villa, dressed in a white summer gown. She would be rich. Balls would be given. In the lights. In the afternoon, Mr. Freysa left, and Marceline guarded the store alone. Outside, the bluish avenue and the blue uniforms. Well-dressed people circulated, stopped for a moment near the display. Inside, the blue reflection of the high gray windows dimmed the vibrancies of the hues. A torpid peace, where the regret of her past sank in Marceline, took hold. Between 3 and 5, some buyers arrived. Henriette arranged the merchandise without boasting, but by suggesting decoration ideas. At 6 o'clock, the gas lamps were lit. Fat ladies with diamond-studded ears, older gentlemen, very difficult and grumpy, turned each piece over and wanted to match it with indistinguishable colored fabrics. Often a tall blond boy, his wallet held against his short mastic jacket, his calves almost tearing a light-checked pant, showed his pink face sharpened by a pointed beard at the window. He couldn't see the cash register, nor Marcelino, who was brightening up with her large eyes and coachman's profile. Her new gloves were red, and the horseshoe adorning her sports journal. A huge bamboo, the monocle hanging from a thread, fell out of sight. Charles! Perhaps the sight of the curtains wasn't enough for him, because soon he withdrew, shrugging his shoulders up to the gigantic and hard forms of his hat. And Marcelino caught a glimpse of that thick torso for an instant among the oriflued lanterns of the cars. Mazagran? Monsieur Genez. The boy, stout, brown, with bristling eyebrows on a slick face like a chaplain's, rushed over. An acknowledgment. Something to write about. The boy walked away but was immediately called back by a formidable, Charles, monsieur? And oh, the evening papers. Isn't that right, Monsieur Genez? Yes, I knew it. It's mail day for Monsieur today. I read your last article, in the Radical de l'Hérault. Oh, it's the government that won't be happy. Genez smiles with disdain. He arranged everything on the table. After a few minutes, the boy returned, carrying a tray with 4 newspapers and a notepad. You know I never take it, shouted Genez. Behind him, the waiter, awkward in his movements, emerged and meowed. Cream? Ah, did those gentlemen come this afternoon? Charles intervened. He should be excused, Mr. Genez. He's new here. Did they stay long? Mr. Albarel came with Mr. Sicard around 1 o'clock. They played pool. Until 2.5 hours. Oh, they won't be late. Genez checked his watch. Mr. Sicard has an appointment herewith. His lady, said the boy with a wink. Balding, stooped, pot-bellied, with a forehead creased in worry, Nicolas Genez. Meticulously, with calligraphy curves, he writes, Jules Ferry, the Tonkinese, white and gold, under the gaslight, the coffee shop. Heavy doors swing open, revealing a bustling interior. Behind the counter, amidst decanters of cognac, bowls, plump flasks, and tall bottles in hues of red, yellow, and green, the cashier reigns supreme in the grandeur of her breasts. Waiters hurry about, carrying trays piled high with glasses. Silky moire curtains with delicate waves give the room a seedy intimacy. Over there, the worn-out boss, adorned with chrysalises, eagerly joins 3 exotic women gloved like English coaches and flanked by robust waitresses. Halberds, pertuisans, and lances arranged in bundles support coats and hats of the patrons. Metal wire quivers painted and embellished hold umbrellas and canes. Knights' helms made of tin spit out rags from their raised visors for table cleanliness. Marmo, canward dune, or tish, or warwin with formalad. Deep down, a fairy cave, illuminated by colored lampshades, with its mouth of cardboard stone, A thin jet of water splashes and stuffed seagulls dream, suspended from the ceiling with their wings outspread to the monotonous sound of collisions. Our Captain Moore, and West, and Fee. Oh, good. The boy, vigilant, announces, "These gentlemen." Evening, Junez, Dotto. Good evening, Alberel. Good evening, Sicard. Good evening, Castellan. Good evening, Rivas. Maurice, Alberel. Clean-shaven favorites on the firmness of his cheeks. The ambiguous elegance of a land agent. With a fine comb, his black and smooth hair reaches up to his eyebrows. Francis, Sicard, Dot. Castellan. Tiny crystals form at his near sight. Second clerk with me, Sucet, the notary, on Rue de la Paix. A ghetto profile. He does journalism. Rivas. In Madrid, more than one greets him, and he is proud of it. A refractory carabiner, Dot. Newspaper reading, his only toil. With a gesture of disdain, the clerk replied, "She's becoming quite the hag." "Hey, scoundrel," Genesis said to Sicard, tapping him lightly on the back. "We're expecting beautiful Clemence this evening, it seems. First, we need to ask for her opinion." "Complain," Alberel interrupted. "I'd happily take a hag like that. Take her, my dear. I cede her to you enthusiastically. And then, I have a principle never to take over from my friends. She works in the same store. The other day I saw Clemence with a little blonde mess, very cute. You could court her." "That's an idea. I'll ask Clemence for information. Say, Genesis, if we all found mistresses in the same store. That would be funny." "Oh, I prefer a brothel." "Shh." Genesis sat down next to Castellan. "I want to show you my correspondence." It was Rivas who let out his favorite cry while flipping through illustrated newspapers. "I believe that's it. You will see." The journalist took the manuscript and skimmed through it indifferently. "Not bad, my dear, not bad. You're making progress." Approving smiles and frowning glances alternated on his face as he read. "But you need to work harder, a lot harder. Everything is there. The adjective is often banal. Look for the adjective, the one that carries weight. Incidents sometimes get entangled. Tabarin. Believe my old experience. What horse are you playing tomorrow, Alberel?" Genus put the paper back in his pocket, a little crumpled by these criticisms. "Zuzoot? Oh, no. You have to play Zuzoot? Never in my life. Believe me. I have reliable information." "Why? Isn't it surprising with his tips, this Sicard? Because you always make me lose." "I made you lose? Me? When?" "But last Sunday again, with Grinchou. My dear, it's the jockey's fault. Everyone has said so." "I know that joke. So you're going to play Tabarin?" "Perfectly. Too bad for you. We'll see. And, shit!" shouted the irrepressible Rivas. "How many are we?" "Our game of piquet," interrupted Jeunesse. "Mr. Castellan, will you play?" Rivas, there's no way to get him out of his papers." "Sorry. So, I'm forced to leave. I have an article to finish." "We'll play 3? Does he have talent?" asked Alberel. After the journalist left, Jeunesse, deeply offended by his criticisms, said, shrugging his shoulders, "What a poser is Castellan. He always has articles to do, and we never see them anywhere. Just a reporter." "I don't think he's very strong," said Sicard. "One day he claimed that Georgette couldn't write. When? He writes, oh, the master of forges. Yes. Always poking his nose in your dirty business." "Here comes Clémence," suddenly cried a big redhead, her neck perched on a velvet granite cloak. Clemence sat next to Sicard, kissing the tip of his beard while she whispered, "Good evening, dear." What a type. The clerk allowed himself to be cuddled despite his discomfort. Clemence said, wrinkling her nose at this icy reception. "He's always sulking. I have something to tell you." "Come sit by me, Madame Clemence," Alberel said. "Ah, some information I need to ask for." "Yes, information? And about what?" "About a little blonde girl who works in your store." Oh, little Henriette. Her name is Henrietta?" Yes, she comes from a good family. Ruined. Albarel gestured. It's true, Mr. Albarel. It's not a joke. She told him everything she knew about the Goubert family. So, she's wise? Oh! Yes. She gets bored, poor thing, with her mischievous sister. She gets bored. I like Henriette a lot. She's funny and not pushy. And her sister? Her sister? Oh, there's one who has her head up and acts high and mighty. She is very good with the boss, for example. Ah! Oh, but very good. They balance things out together all the time. The balance? Henriette says that. She's quite funny, that little one. I like her, but it's her sister who gets on my nerves. The others? And the other workers, how are they? Meh, this and that. There's Leontine, she's not bad. Leontine, a bit. Studgy, but not bad anyway. She'd like to balance things with the boss. Ah, she would. But yes, only the boss doesn't want to. He doesn't want to. Henriette's sister. He prefers to balance things with Marceline. Marceline? So, the boss. Ha! Balancing things. Ho! Ho! With, Marceline. Ha! Fee! Fee! Nonsense, Rovasse. Clémence sipped her glass of Kümmel that had just been served to her. Kümmel is good, it's strong. I like it, she said, stroking her breasts contentedly in her usual manner. Then to Maurice Albarel. So like this, Mr. Maurice, you're in love with little Henriette? In love? I don't even know her. Oh, Will. She's very chic. You take care of my interests with her? We'll see. Later, we'll see. I'm counting on it, hey? Here comes my platonic lover, she cried, clapping her hands, Clemence, who was looking towards the cafe door. Good evening, my lover. A tall, thin puppet dressed in black, with a round, sheep-like face, though terribly bearded, topped with a tiny, gluey high hat, approached the table of the three friends, resembling an old raven with clipped wings. Good. Pirette. Long. Evening, Pirette. Dear. Live Pirette. Chic. Mr. Pirette lived frugally but dignily according to his accountant's fees. Clemence stood up, took a rose from her bodice, and pinned it to Pirette's buttonhole with comic gestures. Timid, silent, daydreaming, and sentimental, he had dedicated to the fair sex a chivalrous and disinterested cult. Hey, Monsieur Pirette, I think you're courting my wife. What a lucky guy, this Pirette. Irresistible, my dear. Chic, chic. Let them talk, Monsieur Pirette. They're jealous, Clemence interrupted. Stand face to face with me there. We'll have a little aside. With pleasure, madam. What shall we play? Anything you want. A Kümmel, perhaps? Perfectly. I like Kümmel very much. I like everything that's sharp, bad. Mechanically, Henriette followed the service. The venerable priest prostrated in prayer. The fabric of the chasuble shimmered, and the golden lamb, embroidered at its center, gleamed. And you, Monsieur Pirette? In St. Sulpice Church, the congregation gathers around the choir, under the marble pillars, up to the communion table, and a golden altar rises from the steps. A vague piety held her serious, even though she had not practiced the sacrament for 2 years. Mr. Goubert joked with the priests. She took advantage of this to avoid confession. Deep in her memory, the paternal suspicion persisted that it was only spying. Like her, Marceline thought. I'll assure, or down, or matter, one trans and one. Oh, or in. However, out of custom and a misguided but persistent belief that not attending would be a grave error of manners and morality, they never missed Sunday services, and also because they felt a need to maintain some connection with the church, where, on fixed days, they met the same faces and wore similar attire. The two sisters alighted from the tram with a joy for simply walking, for feeling the cool air in their skirts. At Place de l'Étoile, Henriette's shoelace came undone. One must stop for a moment under the arch of the arch to realign. This ridiculous task in front of everyone exasperates the young girl. Intruders watch her as she does it. Painfully, her corset pinches her, hunched over. As she stands up, a commotion within her. On the high relief, the colossal child leaps, and the awakening of his naked virility. To her sudden shame of knowledge, the sexual mystery reveals itself. Explicitly, lewd comments heard force her memory. In the Courbevoie tram, next to Marceline, an urge for confidences initially incites Henriette. Quickly, she reproaches herself, and, silent, reflects. A condemnation for the guest act, even a doubt that love could be realized thus. Then, with the rout of scruples, an anxious desire to know. If modesty chides, instinct pollutes imagination. Of the male. Kisses on the lips, embraces around the arms. Underwear, or more, Einwargie. To the wood, through the paths. Aunenway, Banjum, Herodon. Power, Parisian, Estalin, Tarierne, and Fructans. Gradually the elder one relaxed. Under the urgency of her new emotions, Henriette lavishly bestows on her sister tender words, whispered, that naturally come to her. Slow caresses and soft. And delightfully it was an afternoon in coolness, where resin smelled of the buzzing of drones. In exquisite weariness, Henriette's fever subsided. A desire to be good to all, to soften at the rest of the divans. They discovered a tiny violet hidden under the herbs. They found joy in it. Henriette flew it to her sister, and buried it in her corsage between two buttons, and even further, in the hollow of her chest. This freshness on her skin was an extreme delight. But they discovered others, violets, other, and more. They laughed for no reason. They put them in their mouths. They tore off their pistils with their teeth and ate them. They sucked the sap from their stems in a compelling thirst to chill their lips. Each made a large bouquet where the golden buttons burst among the pink whiteness of daisies and the dark delivery of violets. Marceline did not stop pursuing the little one, so graceful in her race with her violet stockings fluttering in the skirt's flight, and her very slender figure bound by a wide gap and her flat back on long legs. Finally, all out of breath, they took each other's arms. In a solitary alley, they embraced each other's cheeks for a long time. What a filthy bouquet! You wouldn't give 2 sous for it, cried passing women, pointing to their flowers. And suddenly, both of them felt their joy collapse. They looked at each other with a strong desire to cry. Henriette went to dress. Unsparing misery once again imposed itself upon them, their misery and servility. The pattern informed. It's 3 o'clock. When she was ready, she found Clémence already laden with the serge envelope containing the fabrics, so try to be back at 5 o'clock. This lady will keep you for a long time, no doubt. She is very meticulous. Yes, sir. Goodbye, sir. Goodbye. He closed the door, and, through the window, watched them for a while. A clear, bright day illuminated the gray-blue asphalt and the clean glass of the street lamps. In open carriages, ladies relaxed. They walked with joy and agility in the golden sunlight. A gentle breeze made them tilt their necks, their well-combed hair, and the same breeze ruffled the skirts of their jackets, which they gathered at their waists, up their gloves. As the 2 young girls approached the corner of the Rue des Pyramides, Sicard joined them. This gentleman seemed quite insolent to her. He greeted Henriette with a grand bow, and immediately addressed Clémence by her first name. Henriette, slightly discomfited by this familiar demeanor, stood back in affected discretion. However, as she observed his manners more closely, she noticed that he never spoke without an elegance of terms and flattering formulas for Clémence, who beamed with pride. She expected him to leave them at any moment. The embroiderer caught her companion's pinched expression. She only responded timidly to Sicard and drew closer to Henriette. Soon the young man addressed some words to her, which she considered very dignified in returning only cold monosyllables. Mr. Sicard, my friend. And she aimed at the statue of Joan of Arc, her bronze oriflamme cut into the sky, with the conviction that there he would turn the corner of Rue de Rivoli, while they continued straight ahead. He showed such persistence in not abandoning them that Clémence felt she should complete the formalities of presentation. Madame Henriette, the first from Frisia. He explained that he was a notary's clerk on Rue de la Paix. He was going to deliver a document to a client. He resaluted, uncovering his sparse hair on a very white occiput. He had 25,000 francs in bearer securities in his handkerchief. If it were stolen? And he began a recent story of assassination. The story interested Henriette, who had read the beginning in the font. Petit Journal.ul. Figaro. He provided new details and, as support, showed her the morning. Suddenly, he made a pun. Clémence burst out laughing. Henriette couldn't help but smile. However, she feared meeting a known and important person while she was in this company. Anxiously, she scanned the crowd of passers-by flowing in both directions on the sidewalk, on either side of the bridge. The Seine was green with large sheets of silver, and a pale white sky behind the Trocadero adorned with gold. Then Sicard spoke about the Hippodrome and described the extraordinary dislocations of a clown. He took Clémence as a witness to his words as she separated them, and, to better make himself understood, he leaned forward, his figure towards his friend's chest, towards Henriette. In response from her, he bestowed many compliments on her mind and grooming, on her exquisite taste. Clémence laughed yellow. She became confused, in an intimate joy. However, Henriette did not find the gentleman sufficiently handsome. Very well dressed in a retrousse pant and a short mastic jacket, he was too fat, a bit bald, the demeanor of an old man. Thus, chatting about trifles, they reached the house of the order. Sicard spoke softly to Clémence, and left, saluting. Then Henriette felt a regret for this ended distraction, but immediately she relished such a feeling. Aurora, Mule, Traoro, Calderal, Kajee, Raoul. Nearly half an hour at the lady's place. Upon leaving, "Here's your big gentleman." At the corner of Boulevard Saint-Germain, in front of a café table, Henriette had just spotted Sicard. Clémence, though she pretended to notice it only on that exclamation, certainly expected to find him there. She feigned surprise, and Henriette was overcome with a mad desire to laugh. She said, "Do you really think I am so foolish?" The young man was already advancing. He asked them to have something with him. Henriette made up an excuse that it was too late, but a clock mounted above a shop showed 4 o'clock. Clémence, while declining the offer gently, made this remark. They were only expected at the store between 5 and 5:30. Then he insisted. Henriette did not want to. It seemed to him that sitting with a man in a café would be acting like a girl. Since Miss does not want, repeated Clémence. Henriette feared she might be judged a flirty girl. She was afraid of hurting this kind gentleman, of being dishonest for no reason. In new instances, Sicard allowed herself to be led by Clémence, who had taken her arm. Clémence and Sicard became familiar with each other. Henriette mocked them from the side, considering their gallant manners ridiculous, yet she smiled condescendingly. They encouraged each other with that smile. Appointments, friendships, quarrels, and disagreements were all laid out before the young girl. Gradually, their conversation turned sour. They brought up old grievances from 6 months ago, and took Henriette as their arbiter. "On B.A. Street," Clémence said. "We've been together for 2 years now, Sicard and I. In the end, he's a good man." For a moment she thought. Then she said, "There are days like this when he's not pleasant. It's not surprising he's so worried, because he's very intelligent. It doesn't matter. He was very kind when I had my miscarriage last summer. He kept me awake for 3 nights, and she did not stop praising them until their return. And then there are times when we stay indoors all day, just the 2 of us." It was the exact account of their good times. Summer walks in the country, meals under the pergolas to the sound of street music, champagne, and immense mirthful glasses, returning on the last riverboat while singing. There's a good little fire, and sunlight streaming through his curtains. She spoke of suburban trains, shopping trips, spectacles, dramas, and operettas listened to in plush boxes, savoring delicious candies, dear dinners at chic restaurants, splendid balls at the opera, American-style suppers where lobster is eaten while the opera, fanning oneself under chandeliers, all candles lit. It's wonderful. We make coffee, an orange salad, and he kisses me, and I kiss him. He has a large sofa in beautiful silk. We remain close to each other, very close, and he reads me novels that make me cry. We love each other well. It's the only joy, after all. Clemency softens. She took out her handkerchief. In her large blue eyes, tears fluctuated. Sympathy also won over Henriette. These confessions revealed exquisite, possible sensations to her, and it tortured the unattainable desire to try this happiness. The love-curiosity that had been tormenting her since Sunday increased with this certainty that the experience was charming. If such pleasures could be found in a union as unpleasantly endured as this one, what wouldn't they be between a beautiful young girl like her and a young man better than a clerk? She grew sad, cursing the ruin that prevented her from marrying. Out of malice, Clemence hesitated to open the door. At the store, Mr. Fraysse, sitting in a low chair next to the older sister, was talking to her. They looked through the window, and the large Clemency, with her red hair pulled tightly into a devilish bun on her face, speckled with blonde spots. This simple, loving embroidery artist loved without obstacles. She envied him. Oh, Marceline was writing, and a regular pale face smiled at the boss's words. She playfully raised her head, pressed it in her hand, and stared at Mr. Fraysse, who, warmly, was pleading. The way your sister is flirting with him. But this is a declaration. Leontine will be so angry. At this jest, Henriette wanted to protest. It's not right to say that. At the cash register, Marceline, sitting on a high bench, was writing, poring over the general ledger, sorting letters. Her white hand wanders among the papers. Sometimes her severe profile turns outward. She follows in a daydream the passing of passers-by. She thinks about how to acquire a commercial property and pay for it quickly. It had rained. The asphalt reflected in golden yellow waves the tremblings of the street lamps. She built herself a novel of a triumphant life. She attempted happy ventures. She opened there across the way a decorative store where everything would sell, from modern bronzes, Carolus Duran and Bonnet, to Roman amphoras and Etruscan shards. The only light in the dim night. Clemence and Henriette walked quickly, their eyes hypnotized by these circular lights that formed double rows, converging at the end of the straight avenue like the gems of a flaming color. Around the corner of the Pyramid Street, two men strolled while smoking. They approached. It was Sicard and Albarel. "Good evening, miss," said the clerk to Henriette, bowing his hat. "Excuse me if I didn't greet you this afternoon. It was out of discretion." "You were right, sir. Allow me to introduce my friend Maurice Albarel." He then turned to Henrietta, Miss Clemence's equal. The two young men walked together, linking arms beside Clemence. Each time she met Albarel's gaze fixed upon her, she felt scrutinized. Henriette, in the moments when they passed beneath the glow of street lamps, tried to catch a glimpse of the handsome boy whose complexion and lips had captivated her instantly. As Sicard grew closer to Clemence, the other approached Henriette. He spoke to her about the weather. They walked her home at 3, and as his slow, accented voice filled her ears, she realized he liked her, that she could see herself living with him. En Rue du Bac, the two men waited until Clemence had seen her safely to her door. Before going in, little Goubert looked back one last time, hoping to catch another glimpse. As she lay down, she offered a prayer of thanks to her friend, who, so discreetly, had brought her a lover. Questioning this escapade, she saw nothing but natural and appropriate about it. Their conversation had been honest, even banal. He conducted himself like a well-bred man. Mayor Joe, Town. Since Easter, the workers kept watch. Kan beduel for Kanscheller, the Kalben. Only Marceline left early. Henriette and Clemence returned late from their outings. Maurice Albarel could drive them home every evening. Henriette found great amusement in the effort he made to seem friendly. She pretended to say little, contenting herself with brief responses. Little by little, she was unconsciously conquered by the charm of his conversation and the attentions he showed her. They went to the cafe once, all four of them. She saw him then, in all the splendor of his pale skin, rosy cheeks, and delicate features adorned with smooth, neatly trimmed mustaches. He had black, piercing eyes, a greasy white hand, almond-shaped nails, and on his little finger, a large gold ring with a diamond. He knew how to order chocolate Bavarois. His initials were engraved on his cane. He looked her over with disdain. A well-dressed woman tried to get his attention. In the street, she didn't resist too much when he kissed her goodbye. For that, Henriette replied with a furtive pressure to the constant pressure of his knee under the table. And when he asked if she loved him a little, she fled without answering, rather than saying no. The trace of the kiss remained on her skin, burning her for a long time. She preserved and savored with intimate joy the sensation of warm lips pressed to her cheek, and it wasn't a mistake to accommodate herself to the daily society of a handsome and kind young man, when all she received was a stolen kiss. May. She was not yet so guilty as her sister, who, after all, had no wrong. On the first steps of the staircase, Henriette stopped, closely leaning against Maurice. She looked, alarmed. At her feet, the black, red, and gold silhouette of a municipal official, the brown, menacing back of a city sergeant. Then, under pearl-gray ceilings with indistinctly green or purple stripes, over a reflux of top hats, soft felt hats, women's hats with colorful plumes that fly away, the misting of ice, fronts bent over violas, with an arm agitating in the air. "Let's not enter." "I'm afraid." "You are crazy. It's very fun, Bullier, you'll see." And buzzing sounds emanate from this crowd. Sharp screams pierce at intervals. Suddenly, string instrument complaints and brass stridencies burst forth, rising, and all merge into a clamor that feverishly stirs. Alberel is training Henriette. Very quickly she adapted to this turmoil, to this splash of light. Her insouciance returned along with her caustic wit. And the gentleman, hat clip, those trinkets on her stomach, that tarnished bracelet on her dirty gloves. This one skipping around, that one swaying, another walking like a duck, and yet another adjusting her dress at every moment. She enjoyed poking fun at the bad taste of these ladies' toilets, the shifty looks of some, the greedy and pretentious demeanor of others, their tics, that flowery hat like a bed of flowers, bonnet, that tall, thin woman in a caraco olive, that fur as rough as a cat's fur, those earrings, teeth, disheveled, with hirsute beards, open vests, ties in the wind, a felt hat on their side, like artists, with gummed-up throats choked by double-screen high collars, the pants squeezed around pointy and enormous shoes, hands gloved in brick. Big gentlemen with glasses eyed the girls below, not daring to approach. But the Negroes were the most entertaining. Rugged older women sprawled across the benches, their gaping, toothless mouths causing a wry grin. Ho ho, the lovers. Some were admirably polished with round white eyes. Others were café au lait or brown, sporting a rare beard beneath an impressive nose with flaring, sloping nostrils. "How foolish you are!" A woman's head poked out from Henrietta and Alberel's intertwined arms, tousled, with a smirk at the corners of her mouth, both kind and teasing. "Dear, they frightened her." "You scared me," Clémence said in a fluting voice. "Poor! And besides, we're not lovers, we're just friends," Henrietta replied dignantly, and Clémence on a giggly tone. "That will come. Will. And now, my children, let us drink some Kümmel. It's good Kümmel, it stings. Power worm, Benisuon, Benwaishinut Corda. Andorwell, Parisian, Wardle. Andorwell, Verdue, Wardjarum, Runolme. The crowd moved in a more impetuous crush. We were suffocating. And the same figures kept passing, puffy, flavescent figures without profile, mummified ones with lamentable thoraces. Bent-over bohemians alternated with loutish, emaciated individuals. Every now and then, a horizontal figure of great distinction emerged, magnificent, in the arms of a sturdy horseman. Henriette gave in to the tickling sensation of strong liquors on her palate and between her teeth. Clemens filled her glass with Kümmel, over and over again, repeating, in an obstinate drunken rant, "I like Kümmel, it stings," accompanied by her usual tic, roaming her palm around the tips of her breast. She'd even tried smoking a Maryland cigarette, bravado. Deliciously, her nostrils sucked in human skin emissions. To her ears, the tumults wrangled like electric vibrations. At times, she felt like screaming, singing, or crossing her legs in a flutter of skirts. Alberel drew close, squeezed her hands, drank her in with his eyes, knee to knee. In her dark silk gown, with a high collar edged in lace, her fair hair ruffling over her forehead, cheeks tinged with a fading rose, her dancing pupil under flickering lashes. The young girl presented all the appearance of a prestigious being, animated by a false life. The orchestra struck up a dance tune. With a sudden jerk from within, Clemence stood. Alberel and Henriette followed to watch them. Already couples were whirling around. "Let's go dancing, my dear," she said to Sicard, who complied without enthusiasm. She hesitated. Professional dancers or nostalgic young students remembering provincial family get-togethers. Suddenly, Alberel turned to Henriette. "Would you care to dance a waltz, miss?" She found it inconvenient and even somewhat ridiculous. Then she consented. "You're enjoying yourself, little scoundrel," said Clemence. When they returned to their table, the young girl was gasping, with blood rushing to her head and eyes filled with tears. At first, she felt a sort of shame at spinning around in the middle of a circle of strangers. But little by little, as visual perception became blurred in the whirling of the waltz, she forgot her shame and her scruples, given over to the soft and languid vertigo that made her pale. "It was quite a waste of all those formalities when we invited you to come with us. We haven't eaten you yet, I believe." Henriette smiled. She glanced at Alberel, who was affectionately pressing her small finger on her left hand. Seated across from them, 5 or 6 Romanian students were speaking loudly, their gestures prolific, their accent thick and guttural. Alberel noticed the goings-on, and responded by fixing the Romanian with a challenging expression. One of them, a tall, handsome young man with excessively pomaded black hair leaning back in his chair, had been staring at Henriette for a few moments through his monocle with haughtiness. The Romanian smiled disdainfully, without changing his attitude, and adjusted his monocle. Suddenly, Alberel stood up furiously and said, "Sir, I forbid you to stare at Miss in this impolite manner. Sir, I'll do as I please. You won't continue. We'll see. And you an idiot. Sir, you're a bully. You'll be held accountable for this. When you want. Yes, you will be. On foot and on horseback. Stop joking around. And even in a balloon, if that makes you happy." The crowd had gathered at the sound of the argument. "Come now, gentlemen, let's be civilized. Exchange your cards. That's the simplest way." Animal sounds, kiss, women riding on their husbands' shoulders laughed. The fellow who meddled in other people's affairs with such casualness was a tall blond man with huge hands that commanded respect. He nodded to Alberel. Alberel recognized Mr. de Saint-Lager. Porte. He had met him before in a circle. The cards were exchanged. Maurice Alberel, Pierre Culesco Doraway. De Saint-Lager sat down at Alberel's table. The curious ones dispersed, disappointed. Henriette turned as white as chalk. Her handcuffs trembled. "My dear, in these affairs one must be correct above all." "You're right," replied Alberel. "Words are useless," said de Saint-Lager sententiously. "I know a thing or two. Do you want to do me a favor? I've fought 4 times and served as a witness in 12 or 15 duels. I can't remember exactly," continued de Saint-Lager, stroking his mustache. "I guess so. With pleasure. Thank you. Do you want to act as my witness? I trust your courage. Don't worry. What is your swordplay like?" "Oh," said Alberel, who had taken a few fencing lessons in his life. "I used to be quite strong, but I'm a bit rusty. I'll give you advice. I know all the tricks, you know. I know you're a fine swordsman." "The armory on the boulevard is a joke," continued Saint-Lager with an air of superiority. "The amateurs talked about in the papers, mere amateurs, my dear. I could put them to shame in 12 blows. You see, fencing is only done in the army. I'll introduce you to my arms master, a former guard captain, a pupil of old Pons. He knows it inside out, don't worry. Isn't that so, Sicard? Allow me, my dear Saint-Lager, to introduce my friend Sicard, who will be my second witness." The clerk didn't like duels and all that nonsense, yet he couldn't decently refuse this service to an old comrade. He then replied, "You ask me, my dear?" Saint-Lager takes the card of the opponent and reads, "Pierre Culesco, 3, Rue Racine. Mr. Sicard, if you wish, we will go to this gentleman's tomorrow at around 10 in the morning." "Absolutely, sir." Not at all. We can meet at the Vachette Café, if it doesn't bother you. Mr. Saint-Leger. All of this is nonsense, interrupted Clémence. Sicard signaled for her to be quiet. She shrugged. My little one, it's past 11. We must leave. Mr. Albarel will accompany Henriette to her door. How? Can we not leave together? Asked the disappointed Henriette. My dear, I'm not going home. I'm staying at Sicard's. Mr. Albarel, will you escort Henriette, won't you? But it's my duty, a very pleasant one, said Albarel politely. The door slammed shut. Before getting into the car, Albarel whispered his own address to the coachman instead of Henriette's, then took a seat next to the young girl. The carriage rolled with a dull thud down the boulevard. Inside it was dim and suffocatingly close. Outside, through the cloudy window, in glimpses, streets with flickering gas lamps and parallel lines that somehow seemed to converge. Closer up, bare tree trunks, Morris columns covered in posters, shuttered in gloomy shop fronts, sometimes with 2 city constables leaning against them. The yellow stained glass windows of breweries, sometimes vomiting out black masses, sometimes swallowing them up, and the lanterns of the fiacres crossing each other, menacing the elongated necks of the red horses, people pass in groups, singing, and always, on the uneven cobblestones, the monotonous rumble of the carriage wheels, jolting. Henriette only perceives these things dimly. With a heavy head from the drinks she's had, still shaken by that scene of provocation, she thinks about her escapade and disapproves. Why run off to public balls with a man she barely knows? And they're going to fight because of her. If Albarel is going to be killed, she believes she sees him already wounded, bloody, gasping. Definitely she was wrong to listen to that madwoman, Clémence. Yet Albarel had been very proper all evening, very reserved. But this duel. Then, her thoughts blur again. The effect of Kümmel, pain in her temples, and nervous spasms throughout her body. Albarel gently took the young girl's hand. You're so cold. Are you sick? No, but this duel, a duel because of me. I'm very unhappy. Don't be afraid, Miss Henriette. Please don't fight. It's impossible, but if you promise me to think of me a little, it will bring me luck. And he squeezed the girl's hand more tightly. Henriette replied in a gasping voice, I promise you, sir. Albarel covered the hand he held with long kisses. The carriage climbed up Rue Monge at that moment, creaking on its axles. Unaware of Paris's topography, Henriette couldn't suspect the young man's treachery. If you knew how much I love you, Henriette, Albarel sighed, and he spoke in loving hyperbole. He tried to embrace her, but Henriette struggled weakly. Yet deep down, Albarel pleased her. Exhausted by the drinks, dance, and all the emotions of the evening, she felt weary, incapable of any energy. She breathed in voluptuously the breath that the young man's mouth close to hers blew on her face. The touch of her skin sent a shiver down his spine. Suddenly, Albarel sought Henriette's lips, sealing them roughly with his own. For a moment the young girl tried to free herself. Then a new sensation of delicious torpor, like warm water infused with aromatics, washed over her from neck to foot, and she found herself surrendering to the kisses mechanically. The carriage stopped at the corner of Avenue des Gobelins and Boulevard Arago. Albarel jumped out and helped Henriette down. The coachman, happy with a generous tip, took them off in the direction of Place d'Italie, laughing. Henriette looked around, stunned. She couldn't find the narrow street of Sèvres. Wide boulevards stretched out on all sides into the night. Tall, cold, and silent houses rose up. Leafy trees cast an ominous shadow onto the pavement from the dim glow of street lamps that lined the horizon. Albarel, sensing danger, found himself saying, volubly, Henriette, don't get angry. If I've deceived you, it's to have the joy of being with you for a few more minutes. Sir, replied Henriette harshly, I thought you were a man of honor. I was wrong. This is a lesson you're giving me, and it won't be forgotten. Henriette, Henriette, pleaded Albarel, listen to me. Henriette, don't talk to me so harshly. I love you so much. Forgive me, Henriette, forgive me. I love you so much. Henriette, if I have to die in this duel, do you want me to die with the regret of having hurt you? I'm mad. I need to go back right now. My sister thinks I'm at the theater. I forgive you, sir, though you don't deserve it. But for God's sake, a carriage. Find me a carriage. It must be late, Mr. Albarel. I need to go. I have to leave immediately. In the depths of her heart, Henrietta's anger was not excessive, but the situation terrified her. Feeling her temper soften, Albarel continued. It's not yet 11:30. Some theaters run late. You can tell your sister you stayed to chat with Clemos. Henrietta, don't be cruel. If only you knew how unhappy I am without you. Come up to my place. We'll talk. I promise to be reasonable, very reasonable. We'll chat for a quarter of an hour, just a quarter of an hour. After that, I'll escort you home right away. I promise. Henrietta, I love you. I love you. I'm sure I drowned so all down. And fret, I'll roar, I'm a Jew, I don't know. Capture old rain, or man's free, for in the deep opaque darkness of the staircase, her feet sore from stepping on the spinning first stair, Albarel said. Take my arm, she added, lighting a match. They climbed laboriously and silently to the second floor. All of a sudden, a draft of air circulating in the damp corridor caused the flame to flicker wildly and eventually go out. We only have one more floor to climb, Albarel said, lighting another match. I'll lower, tension, coming Jews or me, the balling and then, cotton, owl, or geese sure, wall or town unnoted. Some chartreuse? He asked, filling 2 small glasses. No, thank you. I've had too much tonight. My head is already spinning. He lit a cigarette. Would you like to smoke a cigarette? Just a tiny bit, to please me, and he gently held the full glass to the young girl's lips. It's Levant tobacco, very light. Oh, I never smoke. Here, we'll smoke this cigarette together. I tried smoking at Bullier, for laughs. You're so kind when you blow the smoke from your pretty pink lips. He spoke for a long time, perplexed, his right hand on Henrietta's knees, who smiled mechanically, her gaze vague as she looked at the curtain folds. From time to time she repeated, It must be very late. I must go home. To this threat, Albarel responded with new, more daring caresses, pressing himself against her. One could hear the rumble of a carriage on the pavement. Henriette strained her ears and feigned to stand up. What time is it? A passing carriage, Mr. Albarel. Would you like to call it? I beg you. I must go home. I must go home. My sister is waiting for me. Albarel realized he was lingering inutilely. Crumbling at the feet of the young girl, his head between her knees, he sighed with a lamentable voice. I wish to die. I am so unhappy. Here, I feel like getting killed in this duel. Don't say such things. You scare me, said Henriette in a brief tone. And he, standing and embracing her, Henriette, Henriette, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. He tries to unbutton the laces of her corset. Frightened, Henriette frees herself from Albarel's arms and runs through the room. She pursues her, bumping over chairs, eyes gleaming with desire, in a frenzy of lust. Then his quivering mouth began sucking like a vacuum on the girl's lips. After a frenzied chase around the side table, he eventually catches up to her in a corner of the room. His feverish and convulsive fingers fumbled through her bodice and under her flustered skirts. Where are you coming from? With her hair loose over her half-naked shoulders, Henriette struggled on. Then she felt herself slipping away, swaying in a sea of unconsciousness. From 2 in the morning, joy. Pale as death, Marceline would not give way to her sister, and seemed determined for the guilty party to explain herself before going in. Under the pressure of this glimmer, the girl lowered her forehead and repeated, Let me pass, come on. She had no doubt that Marceline would notice the trace of kisses on her lips, and the constraint she felt around her eyelids. The light from the lamp she held fell yellow on her peignoir, on her trembling fingers. And, in the shadow of the lampshade, her eyes enlarged with a sharp look at Henriette, whom she insisted on lighting up. What are you looking at me like that for? She finally said, in a bad mood against this enemy will. Tell me, Marceline asked again. You're making me dizzy. But she stepped back at the girl's abrupt gesture, as her voice suddenly became violent. I've already told you. A rage consumed her, predicting severe and meticulous questions about her tattered persona. She took off her hat and comb so that her dispersed hair would no longer reveal her disheveled state. In her ears still rang the deafening kisses. Her cheeks burned. A chaos of delicious and terrifying ideas occupied her mind. She craved an hour of solitude, an hour during which she could analyze and categorize her latest sensations. In some way, she felt the need to weigh the exquisite and disappointing aspects of her escapade in order to judge it definitively and set future conduct guidelines. Aren't you ashamed? Already Marceline joined her. You went running again, bad girl, with that Clemence. Her legs trembled. She placed the lamp on the vanity and sat down. In her ignorant virginal modesty, she didn't understand. She merely sensed something atrocious, the hands of males rummaging through the young girl's belongings, whose tattered condition filled her with despair, as well as signs of debauchery. Henriette's sly attitude did not reassure her. To questions, she simply shrugged her shoulders. She seemed rather to want to assert her independence than to excuse the delay. Marceline waited for an explanation with a tale of some mad caper. This silence increased the older one's anxious fumbling. On the contrary, the little girl kept a sullen expression and undressed slowly without speaking. Usually, laughter and teasing supported Henriette's reasons, not a morose inertia. What finally happened to you? What has befallen you? The little girl pulled the covers tighter. She thought about Albarel's caresses and kindness, and suddenly she felt very unhappy because all of that was missing in this difficult moment. Marceline seemed unkind. What did they do to you? And heavy tears welled up on her cheeks, tears of anger that wet the sheets with gray patches. Marceline still asked. Seeing this deep sorrow, she pitied her and wanted to help her get into bed. Calmly in her bed, perhaps Henriette would confess her misery, and stories of rape and prostitution read in the newspapers obsessed Marceline with terrifying images. If the little girl had been a victim of one of these crimes, then her fear was justified. As she casually picked up the abandoned dress on a chair, a strong smell of tobacco filled the air. She repeated her question in a muffled voice, an anxiety clutching her throat. She blamed her sister for this pain. Her threatening words terrified Henriette, suffering terribly, her temples pounding with fever, her limbs broken. She vaguely murmured, I don't know. Nothing happened to me. You're annoying with your questions. Yet she couldn't tell her everything, but she chose to conceal her love. For a second, she thought to let her confessions flow. Since Marceline loved Mr. Fraysse, what could she object? An intimate pleasure she felt from being the only one who knew, some sort of superiority. Then she lay down, and, to cry, she hid her face in the pillow. It was a sharp pain for her, not to taste any respite. She did not forgive Marceline her obstinacy. Loving herself, should she not have guessed the matter and shown more clemency? She, the weakest, forced to endure everything. She was harassed out of jealousy, out of authoritative meanness, to humiliate her, to make it well understood that seniority imposed rights. A great desire came over her to retaliate with sharp words. If my dress smells of tobacco, it's because I went to the cafe, right? How so, to the cafe? Alone? With Clément? It's not possible. There was her cousin. You wouldn't dare enter a cafe alone, both of you. Her cousin? At least she told me it was her cousin. I don't know anything about it. Go ask him. Henriette sat up, determined to stand up to her. She was old enough to be the mistress of her conduct, without a doubt. Her tears had dried up. She looked at Marceline boldly. Now that she was a woman, a new dignity seemed to suit her. If our poor father were still alive. The older sister immediately reprimanded. No, I never would have thought it of you. Are we going to the cafes? Has anyone seen you? But this is crazy, crazy. She bumped into Henrietta's sardonic indifference. No matter how she repeated her warnings, emphasizing her words on her face, the reproaches fell on deaf ears. She grew exasperated. The silly little girl kept her sad smile and a ridiculous air of resigned acceptance, scornful. But Henrietta didn't understand then. Would she let anyone compromise her just for a joke? And how far had her imprudence led her? She refused to say. Besides, where could impudence possibly lead? Marceline didn't know. Once again, she hit a wall of her ignorance about life. And in this congestion of thoughts, she struggled without result, finding nothing to confirm her fear of an irreparable fall, and nothing to spare her from it. Silent, she thought long. More than reproaches, this silence troubled the little one. The sorrow that Marceline affected weighed on her like a cruel blame. Wasn't it making the fault more odious to play this sweet resignation? Indeed, she was annoyed to see her sister emitting enormous sighs aimed at the wall. Go, it's not me who lost our reputation. It seemed that she, the smallest one, the sacrificed one, was in essence tormenting this big girl, stupid in the end, with her lamb-like expressions that were being slaughtered. Henriette interrupted herself to deliberate whether to report the worker's words. She hesitated out of shame at offending. However, wouldn't Marceline someday learn that they were gossiping about her relationship with Mr. Fraisse? Better now. It would be less painful for him to learn from his sister than from a stranger who humiliated him. And above all, though she refused to admit it, Henriette hid behind these motives the desire for vengeance. Soon this desire consumed her entirely, and she decided to reveal it once more. She harbored this since Marceline, having understood her fault, prevented her from reflecting on the memory of her love. She said, without looking at Marceline, who, silent and sad, was thinking, go ahead. Be sure it's not me who lost our reputation. It's been done for a long time. How do you know? What are you saying? You're talking like an idiot. I'm already done, Cower, it will. Henriette continued. Don't you believe it, at least? Marceline begged. No, I'm telling you this. And Marceline fell into the despair of her life. On purpose, she slipped an intonation of doubt into her answer to imply that she was adding credence to it. Without tears, she moaned with cold rage against the wickedness of beings. And doubts also assailed her. In attempting to formulate refutation plans, circumstances that she would bring forth to provide proof of her blameless conduct, she futilely struggled. If realized, all her efforts would only serve to make her look ridiculous and further convince people of their bad suspicions. Had she been imprudent? That was what she now realized. And she repented. Mr. Fraisse was not indifferent to her, as she had wanted to persuade herself. Oh, wand. The candle burned with a long flame. Under big you, zero, annualment. Under and you were, Femordel, Femwell, the silver dial and Daraja and dots patronum. Initially, Henriette felt a triumph at seeing Marceline distress, and her unbearable pride crushed. However, she deemed her vengeance sufficient. Even she blamed the abruptness of her phrases. Then she reveled in the philosophy she had forged on the day when the sister was suspected. It was madness to want to fight against the situation brought about by chance. Besides, she preferred the present state. Better to enjoy it. Turn the disadvantages to advantage. Rich, she would not be today the adored mistress of a charming young man, nor the cause of a duel, as a noble heroine in a novel. People would have pursued her for marriage, for her dowry. It was far better to be loved for oneself. And this presented itself in a more honorable and dignified way than being taken with 100,000 francs, moreover. And, happy in the silence of the gloomy room, she evoked the tenderness of caresses, the dear voice of the young man trembling at her ear with emotional love. She felt again the pleasure of knowing herself desired fiercely. A desire penetrated her, a craving for kisses and embraces, tender claspings in the masculine atmosphere of the bachelor's pad. In the early morning emptiness of the café, in front of a half-drunk vermouth and newspapers flapping in the late sweeps, Saint-Léger waits, broad shoulders, rising, large hands with short fingers, heavy and plantar feet. A tall boy in his 30s, with sparse hair, a faded blonde, gray round eyes that dart a fixed, satisfied and impudent gaze, a slightly aquiline nose outlined on thick cartilages. Thanks to patient tailors, and perhaps also due to domestic care that he lavishes on his wardrobe, Saint-Léger appears well-dressed. He claims ancient Poitevin nobility, related to the most illustrious families. A bit wayward, youthful pranks, he confesses. With his father, he finds himself momentarily reduced to a nearly precarious life. His hats curve high, his high collars point upward. Staying up late, rising late, he spends his afternoons at the armory, and his nights around a gaming table. Perhaps a little friendly with mature ladies, perhaps a little sly, but overall, good heavens, a jovial companion of a tumultuous and reassuring lack of mental acuity. Anwar, in idmo, and one you, unsuchol. 1,000 apologies, Monsieur de Saint-Léger. I kept you waiting, said Sicard, arriving out of breath. But there's no need, my dear. He smiled. I guessed it. The captivating redhead from last night made you sleep in. No, she left early for her shop. The muscles of the clerk twitched in amusement. I had to go to the study to announce my absence. Ah, it's 10:20. Perfectly. We can leave right away if you wish. That way, across from here. Rue. Yes. Racine 3, isn't it? Faunmora. Tightly buttoned up, rigid, with jerky movements, they ascend the bleached staircase. He provides the addresses of his own witnesses in a white voice. Pierre Colesko, very dignified, though a little disturbed, receives the witnesses of his opponent. In his morning attire, a tight-fitting flannel vest that accentuates the drop of his kidneys, a purple silk shirt, and a robust collar where the nerves stand out. For a moment, it's like convex torsos pressed against the tension of the calves. Arms hanging limply forward. Then in the air, the fiery curve of hats being replaced. The sound of a door closing. Outside, the ascent of Boulevard Saint-Michel bathed in sunlight, and the summer verdant of rejuvenated trees glows. The flat hues of multicolored posters light up at the columns of Morris. Cabries rush by like downstream, clattering like upstream. Tram horns clang. On the terraces of cafes, under the spread canopies, smooth-skinned adolescents and young women in tight corsages tip through straws the frigidness of liquors. Oh, I'll array, and I Jew, Belwagium, and much horror. Turning away from Luxembourg amidst the bustling crowd, a grayish or brightly colored carnival Scene-Saint-Lager, and Sicard go. No, uncone. In Paul Vraziano's room, a very young, plump man with narrowed eyes that flicker behind a magnifying glass. All four have been debating for 10 minutes. Gigantic in size, with a fantastical emaciated figure, a macabre Tartaglia forehead under a lock of fur, the waxy skin where deep down the nasolabial fold is carved like Alexander Giska. I propose the Belgian border, Saint-Léger resumed. The Belgian border. It seems prudent to me. I know, Mr. Albarel well. This duel will not be a joke. And the Belgian border, perfectly. Mr. Colesko detests light-hearted meetings, and we have the same ideas, Mr. Giska, I'm sure. A scratch, not worth disturbing ourselves. Certainly. I've fought 3 times. I'm expecting my 5th case. I wouldn't want you as an opponent. Believe me, you must be a fine blade. Just a little longer. Such grand standing. Finally, a first meeting report is drafted and signed. And on the doorstep. Thus we depart tomorrow evening on the 9 o'clock train. Agreed. And greetings as from an android gesture. I will. May. Melwer. Bishirmore. Wanda Anselman with Daddle. A heap of paperwork on the old oak secretary. 2 candles flicker sadly in the dimmed room. This duel, a good opportunity after all. Soon, in the empty hearth, a sudden flame that turns blue forever, seals the secret of many a ruckus. Standing before the fireplace, Albarel thinks. Certainly, I am not a coward. Maurice Albarel, the capricious hand, sorts. Out of fear of a posthumous indiscretion, he sifts through these love letters with their old-fashioned fragrances, these women's portraits, these locks of hair. He sorts through these family letters, friends' cards, these trivial receipts. It has already won Henriette's heart. But what if I were killed? And then, it must be so fun to recount later the twists and turns of an honor affair. Bah! A tragic denouement is so rare. Even so, life, a bad joke. Alberel anticipates in his imagination the scene of the duel. He sees himself there, in the grainy air of morning, under the trees, standing with his shirt sleeves rolled up. The flash of the opposing sword blinds him. It'll be nothing, he concludes. Yet a sudden dread seizes him. If I were to fear, and from all the corners of the dark part of the room, this obsessive phrase rings out in different tones. The ticking of the clock seems to insist. If you were to fear, the Japanese mask stretches the corners of his pale lips as if to whisper, if you were to fear. It even seemed that from the blue screens, monstrous parrots chatter, if you were to fear, and his jaws clench. So Maurice Alberel feels, for a duration of just a few seconds, seized by a reflexive terror. Amorwell, one wire, tarchidoe, and fish, baror and corny. In a very old neighborhood, a twisted alleyway covered in grass scales, in a crumbling house at the end of a narrow path, opening onto the courtyard, a low room with fogged-up tiles. Many daggers score the walls, battle swords, cavalry sabers, boarding axes, arc pistols, a helmet adorns the Master of Arms diploma as a trophy Monsieur Bardil. Gray eyes with dilated pupils, leather face tanned like his professor's chestplate. Father Bardil is an old soldier past 50, of average height, still solid on his feet despite the apparent heaviness of his gait. Long mustaches of fluent rusty blonde over pipe-smoking lips. Ah! He speaks in a stutter. Monsieur Bardil, says Saint-Lager, I bring you my friend, Mr. Alberel, who is to fight tomorrow morning. You're going to show him one of those boots. He used to make weapons, but he's a bit rusty. Father Bardil surreptitiously examines Alberel. We'll see about that. Maurice mechanically scans his surroundings, his heart filled with a sluggish unease. From the armory's changing room, damp canvas smells waft through. A gloomy day filters through the grime on the windows. He sees the walls striped with floral patterns and the polished steels of the trophy. Open up, he says, his voice echoing. He was very jovial, very loquacious, slightly nervous undoubtedly. Accompanied by his two witnesses and Ravasse, who had graciously taken on the role of doctor for this occasion, Maurice enjoyed a hearty dinner liberally lubricated with wine. After coffee, as the train time neared, they all climbed into the carriage. Saint-Lager beside Maurice, Sicard on the jump seat, Ravasse with the coachman. Saint-Lager held the swords carefully wrapped in an overcoat. In the jolts of the carriage, their guards sometimes brushed against Alberel's thigh. This contact left him with a sense of revulsion. Maurice thought, now it was over. A fresh breeze whipped, intensified by the swift movement of the vehicle. There was no other choice. He would fight. Tomorrow he would feel a threatening blade against his chest. Along the boulevard, life buzzes. Tomorrow he would be severely wounded, perhaps dead. Yes, dead there, in hell in a foreign country. Dead, lying in the middle of a wood. Maurice Alberel remains silent, immersed in a wave of unconsciousness. And under the clear summer sky, with the glow of gas lamps, the spread leaves look like varnished metal sheets. The trams rush by, behemoths with incandescent eyes. In the shops, the frosted glass signs multiply the pale globes of the chandeliers. Beings move along the pavement, dragging their shadows behind them. Gare du Nord, Tacto, electric light, funereal and blue on the platform tiles. Calls, hurried steps, and the hubbub of all the departure commotions. Alberel runs to the ticket window. Near him, a tall young man chats with a railway worker. He recognizes his opponent. A furtive, swift glance is exchanged. Andor, and Rome, Ejui, Auwo, and Ejun, Tadweld van Mansora. In the wagon. Awizirolor, Tadwatshun. Sicard dozes in a corner, in a bad mood despite his protest. Ravasse smokes silently, his head covered by a drape-lined tapabort. The train speeds through the night with piercing whistles. Saint-Lager gives Maurice advice on how to behave during the duel. At stations, doors slam shut. Conductors' voices sing in the nocturnal peace. Alberel feels very alert, like a steel shin. His fears from the previous day have vanished. Sometimes travelers board the duelist's compartment. A gentleman in glasses or an old lady wrapped in a shawl with large palm-like patterns. He thinks to himself, I won't be afraid, and smokes cigarettes while chatting with Saint-Leger. Oh, vast plains stretching as far as the eye can see, where the reapers are busy. Mr. deserted the grand square amidst the morning frost. He also amuses himself by peeking out the window. Sleepy little towns with a pointed bell tower gazing at the moon, gently undulating hills on the horizon, the meanders of a river lined with willows, a woodland with knotted trunks, hurried guys, high grasses in a mysterious half-light. A sense of boredom graces the bare facades of the houses in line. Despite the beautiful season, a chill wind stings like a dart. The mechanism of the ancient clock heavily swings. 2 old carriages creak and rattle as they leave Monsieur. In the first, Colesko and his witnesses. In the second, Albarel and his men. Saint-Leger puffs out his chest. He repeats, You'll see if I know how to conduct a duel. Rivas has completely folded his tabor. At times, in a half-sleepy state, he meows, Whoa! We're passing through villages. White houses with lime wash. Squares of beets. On the doorstep of the farmers in their caddis jackets, faces shaven and rugged. A clear rooster crows behind a hedge. A horse snorts. Dogs bark. The gimbard rolls. Meanwhile, Sicard leans out the window, very worried. Maurice replays in his mind straight blows, third position parries, ripostes, ligatures, a whole host of plans. We're being followed. We're tailgated by the police. So let's go then. Look. Indeed, at a distance of about 40 meters, 2 individuals appear to be following the cars at a run. This would be a nasty business, says de Saint-Leger with a frown. Your precious duels are amusing, grumbles Sicard. Rivas, under his tabor, exclaims, Whoa! Albarel tries to reassure everyone. Suddenly, the cars come to a halt at the edge of a small wood. Could it be the police? Gentlemen, said Saint-Leger, alighting from the vehicle, we are being followed. We must clarify that, said Vraziano. In any case, continued Saint-Leger, let's secure our weapons behind this bush. They were very plump individuals, with eyes swollen from fat and double chins. While they were discussing, the 2 men, the cause of the confusion, arrived on the road, gasping for breath. They wore identical blue linen outfits with metal buttons, floral vests, and the finest nankin pants. Saint-Leger addressed them in a terrifying voice. Who are you? What brings you here? The shaven lips of the 2 men stretched into a blissful smile. Oh, they laughed. Sir, please be assured, we are not police. We are brave bourgeois, and we have come for some fun, you know. The 2 unexpected spectators took their place on the road beside the carriages. The duelists entered the woods. The preparations for the battle are drawing to a close. De Saint-Leger is conversing with Vraziano. Further away, Colesko is patiently waiting, stripping twigs. Maurice Albarel looks around in a slightly confused state. Gisca, in a long, ruffled cloak, his lion-like Jew billowing in the wind, tests the strength of one of the swords by brandishing it. Rivas and the opposing team's doctor, a hunched, bearded man, after promising mutual assistance, are systematically spreading their kits on the grass. And all of this in a smoky atmosphere. De Saint-Leger shouted, Come on, gentlemen. A few minutes later, Albarel found himself facing his opponent with a sword in hand. A clatter. Sparks fly from the clash of blades. Albarel pushes forward, almost unconscious. His strikes are parried or they don't land. Finally, after clearing a path, he feels something insubstantial give way. Suddenly, witnesses and doctors rush to the scene. He is injured on his right biceps. Colesko lowered his weapon with a grimace. De Saint-Leger approaches Maurice, looking troubled. After examination, his doctor declares him unable to continue the fight. Phew, just a scratch. It's silly. Then, shaking his hand, lastly, my compliments. It's not your fault. If I'd been a witness to this gentleman, I would have forced him to continue the combat. On the absence of Henriette M. Fraisse, Marceline was questioned by. She is unwell. She is so delicate. Don't you think she listens a little too much? Perhaps she abuses your affection." Blushing, she protested. The previous evening, on returning by chance at a better hour to the lodging, she had found her sister engaged in removing fresh dust stains from her clothes. Perhaps the girl hoped thus to erase traces of a clandestine outing. Another scene left them shaken. Henriette pretended to have gone out for some air at Luxembourg to ease her migraine. "Why, then, these grooming arrangements if she didn't want to hide her walk?" asked Marceline. "Oh, you're so funny," she replied. "You see evil everywhere. We have to keep everything from you." Since then, Marceline, certain of the fault, only sought ways to conceal all these misfortunes, especially Mr. Fraysse. She resented his tales about their common relations. She coldly took Henriette's defense, lingering over excusing and praising her, secretly satisfied at luring Mr. Fraysse, whom she promised to keep at a distance from now on. He, with his man's experience, should have been more delicate to avoid familiar and compromising behavior. Mr. Fraysse insisted. "I'm sure she will arrive any minute now. She promised me. But tell me when she's supposed to come," he said. "By then I'll have someone replace her among these young ladies." This morning she was a bit unwell. She asked to stay in bed for an extra hour. "Can I count on her?" "Yes, sir." Just a few meters before the store, the driver signaled to stop. Around 11 o'clock, the cashier, who was always scanning the avenue for the latecomer, absent-mindedly watched the omnibus from Place Saint-Michel. But the horses, driven by their momentum, only slowed down much further ahead. Out of sheer curiosity, Marceline wanted to see the likely lady who would be getting off and her attire. It was Henriette. The little girl immediately rushed inside the shop, shouting at her sister. "Can't you see I've gotten up, Grumblebug?" With a childlike gesture, she mimed horns and ran straight to the workshop. So quick and impulsive that Marceline couldn't say anything to her. However, he was intrigued by how the omnibus from Place Saint-Michel had brought her, when that carriage did not follow their usual route through the streets of Bha and Pyramids. Certainly, Henriette had run away again in this short space of time. This latest misstep assured Marceline of her inability to convert the absurd little one. In vain had she until that day kept some hope of inducing her into feelings of honor that might guarantee a calm life for the worst. To every lesson, as to every supplication, Henriette evaded. Weary at last of this struggle, Marceline determined not to try conversion any more. The authority needed to tame this temperament was lacking. She dared not pray the Fraysse to take her place. Her timid shame forbade it. "Oh," replied Henriette, "the boss bores me." Henriette was already babbling with her companions and confiding secrets to Clemence's ear. "You know," said the latter, "the boss was furious with you just now. You're in for a scolding. First, he starts bothering me every day at this time, coming here for some miserable francs. You don't earn enough to even buy a Christmas tree. We have to take the omnibuses and rub all his skirts. Definitely it's disgusting," she continued. "Has Mr. Albarel moved house?" "Yes," she answered. "We moved everything yesterday. It was amusing. We had a lot of fun." So Henriette recounted the moving day's mishaps. "This morning I still had to put his things back in order, which is why I arrived late. You think I'm ashamed." A good woman in plaster had fallen on the pavement as they were getting out of the carriage, and there had been at least 20 people gathered around to watch the chaos. I quickly slipped into the house without even paying the coachman. Now Albarel lives in a beautiful apartment on School Street, on the first floor. From the balcony that juts out in front of the 2 window doors, you can see all the way to Boulevard Saint-Michel. But if you only knew, the house is full of cranes, but with very chic women wearing diamonds like that. What joy this rush, and the satisfaction of choosing so much. With Albarel, she recently visited every store selling Japanese items to refresh the young man's somewhat faded furniture. She told everything to Clément, without getting tired of talking. This new existence bored her. It all spun around in her mind and fixed a smile on her lips, and in her eyes without her knowing it. Her memories shifted from one new object to another, from a gentle touch to a kind word, from a funny escapade to a café concert refrain. However she matched the multicolored balls lying on the small round table, She retraced her recent joys. Opulent images haunted her. She found it funny like somersaults, a child's play. This impression banished her old beliefs in the solemnity of love, in the supreme importance of self-giving. She no longer understood why there was such apprehension about giving oneself. She saw passion as gay and grotesque, but she always returned to thoughts of the luxurious joys of her affair. She had an adoration for chic. This word, she pronounced it with all her being, making an effort to say it well. The very pointed shoes with flat heels, and the high collars with 2 buttons, the turned-back sleeves of the umbrellas. It reigned for her in Paris. She convinced herself that not being superior in fortune to her peers, she must at least dominate them by elegance. And in this unique way that turns passers-by towards one and excites the easy jokes of the populace, she sought these marks on people's costumes. If they didn't wear them, she despised them. She thought this appearance corroborated certain exclusive occupations of the rich, like the multicolored spectacle of jockeys flying by in a swarm at the height of the grass. A race at Auteuil was agreed with Albarel for the next day. In advance, Henriette promised herself extreme joys and a very stiff attitude from Miss Orton. But she had to think of possible pretexts to be absent that day still. She could no longer pretend to be sick, especially since Marceline knew her escapes from the house. The calm and silence of the older sister worried her. What was she hiding under this cunning facade and those sideways glances that betrayed anger? What an awful life she foresaw there, away from Paris and the opera. She would never tolerate this arrangement, even if it meant cutting ties with her sister and the Fraisse family. Her memory still held the hateful reproaches for having compromised their shared future. She feared a sudden outbreak of hostility, a revelation to Mr. Fraisse about her secret excursions, and perhaps an exile to the province with these very poor Southern relatives who had been unable to attend Mr. Goubert's funeral. Besides, the Fraisse family meant little to her. Mr. Fraisse was a poser, Mrs. Fraisse was always chattering, and the insufferable little girls who asked questions about everything. There were other stores in Paris where she could find work. She was such a good window display manager that they would surely pay her more. Truly, under the guise of friendship, the Fraisse family served their greed well. For some time, Marceline affected a disdain that permeated her most futile words and her most ordinary gestures. This became intolerable for Henriette. Sincerely, she began to hate the older sister. She was reminded of all her injustices and slights. At meals, Henriette was relegated to the far end of the table. Dishes were brought to her without a thank you. People stubbornly refused to respond to her. Deep down, Marceline had eventually developed a genuine repulsion towards her sister. The intermission, the jubilee of illusory spirits, the fragrant moorland exhales into the dark night, all stars buried. So, Henriette only thought about ways to get Albarel to retract his proposal of shared living, and despite Clemence's efforts to steer her away, he took increasing pleasure in the hope of enjoying good times for a few months, with the possibility of enjoying good times returning to work later that winter, and shading the round shadows of the cypresses tickles the melodic presage of the Jubilee. Dark, icy. Invisible crystal wings take flight, descending small noises, the mischief of arpeggios. Silences freeze the lamented gales. Green, the larve floats on the folds of its twisted haunch, in a halo of violet power. It signifies crystal and cymbal sounds. Crystal and cymbal sounds. Bald lemurs in translucent shrouds, fingers entwined before their transparent frames, glide meditatively and radiate heliotrope glows. Musk fragrances pierce, erotic musk scents. Songs like the voices of chord en route, lemur gestures evocative, and the fake region takes form in violet moire. Then, illustrious sets rise as the troubled moon fades, stained with sandalwood. The purple waves curl around her, from the golden sky beaten to the copper earth. At the center of limiting cataracts, the larve reigns, its water eyes, and its crown of belladonnae. With aspects of glasswork, opaline river flowers in her hands, the legion of lemurs aligns on the virgin ivory rocks. The buccinator's clangor the glory of the powers. Lyre chords expire in vibrations of final spasm. The superior chants of the hieratic harps spread over the strident waters. The hieratic chants spread. Ascension. His right hand raises the sept-pointed scepter of amethyst. In a torque of armature where the signs are inscribed, the mage with astral beard appears, amidst his cortege of kobolds and sylphides, and in her eyes from beyond, peoples pass in long trembling streaks. The tiara with 9 golden crowns, 9 bandolets, 9 white serpents charges her colorless forehead, her faceless face. For a long time, with its majestic mountain attitude, it remains in sacred ecstasy under the violet halo of the larve contemplated, and the musics decline into whispering modulations that falter and then undulate, rising towards the bodies of the sylphs flying, naked and blue, slender, hollow hips, thin breasts, and they trace the mediating circles and force ellipses, invocative characters, complex spiral signs that unite the occult energies of the worlds. The mage awakens from ecstasy, his scepter aimed at the hunched and limping kobolds who prostrate themselves and touch the copper ground with their wrinkled skulls, thick and gray beards. Without their thick and gray beards, the words of the incantation soar, revealing an essential words whose syllables bring forth lights, reddish vapors emanating from circles and signs. They gather in columns on the forehead of a temple, which quickly fades to the whiteness of Paros, vapors running low towards the cataracts. They drown them in gleaming currents, a sea that darkens, smooths out, and sparkles with silvery matter patches, reflecting an invisible sun from the east on its flat blue water. The choir of kobolds. Illusory spirits. A sun from the east, dulled by the halo of violet power and the heliotrope irradiations of the lemures. You, disappointing illusions to man. You who chase life away from Nirvana's highest realm. The choir of sylphides. The choir of lemurs. Strong, active spirits, who seize him from perfect contemplation, divine ataraxia. Uncertain veils at the bend of rivers, gemmed phantoms, crowns of dead flowers. The choir of kobolds. Strong spirits that veil the enemy's conquering norms. The choir of sylphides. Blind birds' wings. Sounds in the flat countryside. Lanterns of the lost ship. The choir of lemurs. Dachoroban. The choir of kobolds. You whom he loves. Your mirages where he exhausts himself. The choir of sylphides. Long alleys through the forest, towards the final lights fallen into the hurried twilight. The choir of lemurs. Dacho. Defender spirits who slay the enemy intelligence and keep us in possession of the inviolable rhythms. The choir of kobolds. Swirls of the swollen wave, tingling crotales, girls' voices. Under the forms you lent to the delirium of poets and bards. The choir of sylphides. At the jubilee of the dominators. The choir of lemurs. Be in vision. To the propitious sacrifices, to the favorable sight of the larva, to the favorable words of the mage, beyond the superiorities and the works and the intentions, all. Like a distant sigh, the song of oarsmen breathes, a distant sigh in the sunrise and in the volant sea. Blue by the winds, the purple triangular sail of the trireme glides across the silver waves, shields hanging against the hull gleam, and the oars beat a triple salvo on the thick waves. Then the song of the sailors overshadows the freshening tumult of the flood, crashing against the sacred Paris. The horse-head figurehead gallops in waters crested with gold. From the ship's side, trumpets sound triumphs, and flowers are thrown, and women's kisses and dazzling enthusiasms. Faust walking absorbed in the reading of an ancient manuscript which he follows with a compass, successively descending from the trireme. Aquila. His blonde hair curls over his dazzling armor. He glares furiously with green eyes and strikes the ground with his bloody heel, impatient. His strong arms are bound in chains. He is held by Ulysses, who advances in the guise of a robust old man concealing weapons under his ample cloak. Spartacus, then a crowd of warriors and women, who, little by little, leave the glow of the sun to enter the violet light where tunics float and armor is azure. Round in red, brandishing a sword. Then the group of Eponine and Lucrece, in long white garments, she brown and severe, she blonde and timid. The Bacchae sisters, breast bare, cinched with golden ribbons, holding perfumes in their hands, lips open. and inviting gesture. Horace, hairy, laden with corpses. Roland invincible, issuing challenges. Dr. Whispers, lamentations and cries of rage issue from this multitude that kobolds push towards the temple's steps. Then, the wizard. Achilles. I am the simulacrum of strength. I close my inner eyes to the belligerent manes and the courage of the aspides and tackles, to the manes of peace and caresses and the courage of sloth, to the temperamental manes violet, closed to the exiled forms of numbers and norms, closed my inner eyes. In the beginning, I alone guided men. I made all the prestige of the first chiefs and kings. My decisions were justice. Right was created to sanctify my deeds and desires. My arm fell upon peoples, and peoples became slaves for centuries. They called us the peasants, the serfs. They called themselves the nobles. Look, Ajax and Agamemnon, like me, chained to the people. Diomede, Nestor, Menelaus, all of us enslaved. Ulysses, striking him. This spirit of guile and deceit bound us with his flowery words and gold, and relegated us to the populace. We triumph only on platforms, in the spectacle of brawlers and athletes, to entertain him. Let this loquacious brute be silent, this empty-headed one. I have surpassed the strong by my slow and patient skill. I have undermined the work of the most famous conquerors and citadel burners. Spartacus. It is I who inspired the industrious peoples of cities. It is I who invented rich fabrics and precious drinking horns, complex procedure arts. They wanted to drink from my snares, and abandoned all their power for a little of my mockery. Freedom, freedom. The people are slaughtering each other and crying, down with the tyrants. On pillages, we destroy the aristocracies. The praetorians rush to murder and defile virgins. Walls burn. Freedom, freedom. And I abuse the hordes of mortals, for they have yet to grasp the ridiculous contradiction of social bonds and free aspirations. Horace, embracing. I am the simulacrum of the fatherland. By this name, avid souls have the plebeians slaughtered for the gratification of their grand desires. I incite the idiotic multitude to slaughter, and I bind them in blood, and I lull them in despair. Austere famine, austere prostitution follow the battles. Come, we are the derisive brothers. They laugh uproariously. Eponine and Lucrece. In honor, in conjugal virtue, we sleep the sap and lust. We are the Genese. We level the audacity of young spirits. We are the Gines, the Bacchies. To our lips, the old come to sniff the illusion of love that virgins and women would deny them. We are infamous. To our breasts, the youths pour the shocking rumor of their blood. They emerge from our sated arms, stronger for the struggle. We are infamous. To our sides, along our lines, the initiators discern beauties and harmonies. We are infamous. Roland.u. The invincible swordsman. Honor! Men revile and pierce each other. Prejudice and life seal their impassibility. Dr. Faust. By science, by speculations, mortals guess how they might ravish ecstatically the delights of knowledge. Towards these barely glimpsed felicities they rush mad with joy and desire. Then, with the authority of things written by the primitives and the childhood of the world, I embrace the rise of imaginations. The terrified crowds scream and threaten, and the seekers wander among ambiguities and contradictions. And they acknowledge it. Alceste. Under these heavy veils, towards the indistinct light, they stray in infinite meanderings, towards the light, towards knowledge forever closed. I am the simulacrum of honesty. I drape fraud and wealth in long, pensive, morose attitudes that are unbreakable. Harpagon as everyone bows to his words. Obey, and celebrate for the exaltation of our senses, for the exaltation of our mind, for the exaltation of our exclusive well-being. The Magi. But where have the beautiful entities gone, fickle and futile spirits created by Commedia dell'arte? Appear, entities condemned to nothingness by your treachery. Appear, for a truce, saved from your human bonds, under the royal arches of rights. Appear, golden skies, above the clear front of the temple, emerge Henriette, Marceline, and Alberelle. All three ride a monstrous phallus of Asimon. For a time they hover, then plunge to the center of the celebration like shooting stars. Rumor spreads. Unified laughter shivers through the crowd. Kobolds run to the newcomers and beat them. Sylphides smack them with palm fronds. Opalescent river flowers, agitated from their circling around the enchanted, lessen the severe charm. The gleam of smiles begins to brighten like young moons. Gestures evolve with the rhythmic extent of stellar periods. Hues of twilight sky illuminate pallid faces and kindle ardor in eyes veiled by the numbing of real existence. The choir of L'amour, Fiorinetta, Henriette, Fiorinetta, ... From the thick envelope of terrestrial transformation towards the pure forms of idea, come. Her golden hair gently chaos, necklaces around her neck, and the short white satin skirt is lined with lilac and rose. I am the gentleness of the little loves. To embrace the mock laughter of my heart, they hurry, the choir of lemurs. At the edges of my skirt, at the full of my stockings, to the irritation of my trust smile, sages and fools hasten. Leandre, Alberel Leandre, out of the thick envelope of terrestrial transformation towards the pure forms of idea, come. A sky-blue satin gillet cinches her waist. Gloved in white, her hand rests on the hilt of a rapier with a sheath of white velvet. I am the distinguished model of elegance, delicate manners, diplomacy, luxury, and charm. At my spurs I trail enamored eyes. The choir of lemurs, Dr. Sylvia. For me, women prostitute themselves. Energies toil during the lives of peoples. Ambition hallucinated by my orders and my golden wools, and my belts, and my commands, and my ministries. Beyond the thick envelope of terrestrial transformation, towards the pure forms of the idea, come. Marceline Sylvia ... Powdered in a long satin gray mantle. In stagnant melancholy, in languors, in the torpor of death, in the sovereign boredom and the expectant envy. Imaginations die for the immediate and impossible realities, and I offer the appearance of wisdom. They merge into the crowd. The Magi, chaos, rational chaos. The lemon-bearded rivers beat like wings, in the eternal stir of crocodiles. Under the evergreens that never lose, nor leaves, nor petals the bison's strut, the onocratels. Lucid chaos, rational chaos, chaos of latencies, where, among transfigurations, among glorifications of archivolts and ogives, pass in latticlave, purple, pass, and remain, and lines, angles, equal angles, and the sorrowful proboscises of elephants bind themselves with garlands of roses, with garlands and ribbons of roses, while maidens from Idumea bite the tails of leopards. Under the rose bushes, on the roses, the bulls moan to the tender flesh of the pythonesses, and the centaur makes the horses neigh. Serpents hiss and grumble. Serpents grumble at the head of Medusa. At the crossroads of four roads, the mystics trace pentagrams, and their meters gazed at the retrograde moon. The hero cast in gold, cast in fluid gold. The hero bears the head of Medusa on the bloody point of his sword, and the moon that rises howls. The moon howls at the horrible head. And there, near the ramparts under the barbicanes, near the ramparts where bombs roar, lightly armored soldiers fight for Charles, and Princess Helena smiles down on them from high, where bombs crash against the walls. Princess Helena smiles on. Knights who bear her colors on their helmets' plumes. Lucid chaos, rational chaos, chaos of latencies, where through transformations and glorifications of arches and pointed vaults, angles. Chaos, rational chaos, under the high hats gazing at the wild twilight, their gaunt faces, adorned with shaved beards, reached the hard golden nut of a collar, the dark British suits that constricted. Young girls slowed their pace unconsciously to better see. For some explanation, the precious stone junks sliced through the air at the ends of their brick-gloved hands. Fixed on one brow, monocles cast glints of metal, and on the gray asphalt, thin, black, and long Pulaine boots slipped. The double row of houses with balconies bent towards the green tufts of the Tuileries, to the equestrian silhouette of the maiden holding her bronze oriflamme. In the gentle wind, in the wild light, carriages rustled, their shining roofs like convex ice. Suddenly, white smiles lit up the faces of the lovers. From there rose a faded green satin sky, pierced by the single tiny star that precedes. They responded with affected gestures and lips, exchanging greetings. They joined together. Immediately, Sicard called out, "Sapin!" To the clock, Maurice commanded. A coachman steered his Victoria toward them, scraping the sidewalk. Hour, and Rome, Agio, and Lido, and Mo, Kanshun, Oligi Down. They followed the keys. How one, Agio, June, Igu, and O'Brien. The shimmering ripples of the river embraced the sky's purrs. Maybe Persian is a typo, and should be perception or perspective with the round fanaux of massive boats resembling large rubies. The minarets of Trocadero still hold a drop of gold at their peaks. Brown structures gather on the purples of the far horizon, comprising monuments and rooftops of the suburbs. Farther away, the quadriga of the triumphal arch gallops tumultuously in the citrine degradations of the fading sunset. They do not speak. Henriette reflects gravely. Within the frame of her red hair, Clémence appears as a sepia figure. With small, distracted gestures, she smooths the creases of her skirt. It was, in short, a serious determination to stay completely with Albarel. This handsome, brown-haired boy, might he still hers? His wealth could perhaps keep him from a too great union. So Henrietta alone, or not. For a long time they would remain lovers until the day, convinced that he could not conquer a better fiancée, he married her. If he left her, she would take up her work again. Skillful and astute, she would know how to become entirely indispensable to him. Eventually, she would hold a part of him, his intelligence. After these few months of pleasure, life would seem more agreeable to her, thus speckled with memories of luxurious and joyful times. This immediately determined her course. On the other hand, his 6-week affair left him with only happy memories. Moreover, when she deliberated whether to persist in her current way of living, the image of Marceline wicked and severe forced her to recall all the insults. Maurice's thick red lips, his warm, fuzzy lips, the succulent feasts in the luxurious taverns, the pride of sprawling on cushions in carriages and lowering his gaze towards the bustling crowd below. June, and Region Patretra, Conland of Town, Talbay, at the concert. Region Darren. They didn't stay long. Despite Albarel's denials, she insisted. Henriette pointed out that soon it would be time for her to return home. Amidst the green hues of the gas-lit foliage, scruffy faces with chalky complexions scratch at imaginary strings of false mandolins, and gasp at the sudden, capricious movements of their timply-clad figures in black. In her plan, forcing the young man's prayers down to the most humble and pressing expressions, so as to appear to yield only out of pity, that was the point. She left Clémence and Sicard in front of their chartreuses. At first she was demanding and unpleasant. Later she thought they might bear witness to her mediocre eagerness. But once alone in the car, she became affectionate. Then she simulated a spell of ecstasy, embraced Albarel's waist, smiled continuously with half-closed eyes, gave silent responses in sign language, as if she didn't want to break an intimate charm. That overwhelmed her with comfort. She felt him vibrate near her chest. He, captivated by these expressions, did not leave her eyes. He multiplied the gentle touches of his hands and cheeks. Soon, this emotion gripped her. In turn, a kind of intoxication seized her, making her phalanges curl around the young man's hand. Unconquerable spasms shook her from her toes to her eyelids. By evening, they rolled under the gentle swaying of leaves between shimmering pavements. And in the Japanese room they possessed themselves under the sky of umbrellas, where ladies with fans sinuated among indigo landscapes and golden willows. Wildly, Henriette no longer thought of the plan. Then came weariness. With it, the remembrance of resolutions. It was the rustling of the silk shirt on her feverish limbs, games akin to those of reversed loves against the wall, and which, sketched for a few Trumeau projects, toppled over roses in company with a fawn. For a moment the girl remained silent, her head resting on her lover's sleeping shoulder. She counted up one last time all the favorable or unfavorable motives for her definitive flight. She gently stood up. The lamp's glow, under the incarnadine globe, projected in circles towards her collapsed petticoats. Smiling at herself, the mischievous one began the comedy which she had constructed the scenography for. "Are you dressing up?" And everything happened just as she had foreseen. "Are you leaving already?" Does he sigh? Protestations, supplications. Just one more hour, an hour only. No, no, small nose dry and firm. He rushed upon this warm silk, soaked in his sweat. Slowly she put on her stockings, then her batiste blouse. Modestly she pulled it over the other, which she left gaping afterward. A glimmer in his black and deep eyes, all wet with desire. "Stay, stay." One by one the hooks of the black corset clicked shut. He took her thus partially dressed in the cool, perfumed batiste. She lost her head again. Barely did she resist the triumphant embrace amidst the enveloping caress of the blankets. Then, as he murmured his pleas for a shared existence, she denied it still. "Why?" "You'll be much happier." "No, because." Pouty, she feigned offense at this suggestion of merging, him believing himself compelled to offer theories able to dispel her scruples. Twice more she tried to stand up, and twice more she let herself be held back. From this demonstrative effort, where her patience was strained, Henriette rejoiced, her eye indifferent towards the old woman, who on the ceiling sniffed a lotus, slightly embarrassed. Then, from weariness, she dozed off. Upon waking, it was broad daylight, so she wept. Everything was over. She would never return to the Rue de Sèvres now. Alone, by herself, she would bear life. It was a new existence of freedom and also abandonment. He consoled her with tender words, things already said, for she sensed, in a still vague but affirmed intuition through the old revelations of Clémence, that the lover would become worse than the enemy, the false ally always ready to betray and leave. The certainty of having heard these same protests from him several times only added to her discomfort. The memory of sermons preached against men by the workers filled her with fear that she had been mistaken, and that she would be passed hand to hand like a toy, and despised, brutalized, and hidden from them. Maurice sniffed at the tears on his eyelids. He spoke in a soft voice about how they would be happy together. On the other hand, the calm of her previous life, and the joys of hoping for possible wealth through working with Marceline, suddenly seemed precious to her. To start, they would go the next day to buy some toiletry items. Soon after, they would leave for Dieppe or Trouville, whichever she preferred. The day flowed in waves into the room through the blue curtains drawn back. As the young man spoke, Henriette's gloomy thoughts began to blush. She thought of the promised toiletry items, despite her greedy reason. The idea of sitting on the beach in Trouville with the ladies thrilled her. All the resentment from her mundane worker and family routine washed over her once again. And the charm of feeling pressed by this beautiful youth who for her sake risked death. To keep him always, she relied on her beauty, her graceful babble, and the fervor of her kisses. For, beyond all concern for daily necessities, it seemed to her that losing him would now be a great sorrow. The taste of his velvety lip does not leave her, nor the tactile memory of his delicate skin and the influence of his brown gaze. And, moreover, she is grateful to him for the complete submission he shows to her desires. He does not rule over her imperiously. Unlike Sicard, whose usual bad mood and air of boredom spoiled Clemence's joys, too good to be restrained. At the Louvre perfume counter, the scent of musk permeates the bottles and labels, the stoppers and sachets. She could not decide between the skinned flasks and the pink cardboard boxes sealed with lead plugs. Then the obsequious head of the poorly shaven clerk with bad teeth took over entirely, preventing any preference from being indicated. How ugly this poor man seems in his tattered jacket, among these fresh swans down, these whites of veils, these stacks of gleaming and ornate blue sky pots. She sniffs. Her gaze wanders from one to the other of these things. She questions. Indecisive. Maurice advises her. He has decisive reasons. It's a spray. It isn't a spray. But alone, she chooses her keyring and lingerie. Oh, and she, Darwin, or Darl, hoarding. A joy in displaying the lace trim, the angular pants, the mornings with jabots of lace. She would fear another guardianship even more than this other. Perhaps the idea would take hold of him to treat her like a child and love her less seriously. And since she must resign herself to taking girls' thread, she asks Maurice to wait for her in the carriage. He must be tired, so that he ignores the decision. Well, I would digging, and was shoeing, and the black stockings flecked with silver. Thus, from the room, Henriette emerges transformed. A cream-colored petticoat of guipure over a Havana dress, velvet grenat collar and cuffs, and that large scarlet parasol with ribbons in flux, with a carved apple. She quickly descends the staircase where her new slippers rust. She unfolds her umbrella in the exorbitant sun that violates the pavements, and the cream-colored guipures flutter away with the step. In the reflections of the shop fronts, she admires herself, muted in deep tones that curve to the slenderness of her waist and puff out on the seat. Under the canvas awnings, the crowded terrace of the Café Vachette, with young men neatly dressed, beards, posture all scrupulously similar. They pose near the brown and gold decor of the wood paneling, in front of marble tables and the diaphanous iridescence of appetizers in crystal. Over his absinthe, Maurice smiled at Henriette. "You are charming, exquisite." He leaned over and ordered Madeira for her, while the nearby patrons exchanged glances. Out of politeness, they briefly averted their curious faces. Proud Henriette reviewed her expenses. 500 francs had passed without Maurice objecting. This generosity, after Marcelin's frugality, the memory of her sister filled her with melancholy and fear. If Mr. Fraser were sent to retrieve her, the merchant was about to appear, but above all, she feared that a severe decision might be made, and what sorrow the elder sister must have felt through the night, into the morning. She confided her terror to her lover. "He'll find someone to talk to." Yet with mischievous laughter, she sought to convince him that she didn't care. "Don't be afraid," he replied. "I'm right here. Do you think?" She didn't dare, she said, if he were to suddenly arrive. Besides, it's easy to know his intentions. All we have to do is write to him. However, he immediately composed a letter for her that was so eloquent it charmed her. She would live alone from now on. Mr. Fraser should no longer count on her services. Constant disagreements had arisen between her and Marcelino, and it was only right for the younger one to step down. Everything was explained in clear and straightforward terms that left no doubt about Henrietta's current position, although the matter wasn't explicitly stated. She would not return to the workshop because her salary was insufficient to meet her needs. A kind and appreciative sentence closed the letter. Alberel asked for a blotter and immediately wrote a rough draft. After some hesitations, she copied it, quite pleased, knowing that Mr. Fraser and his sister would read a letter so well written and noble, free from recriminations. She wondered how one could say so much in so few words. The whole fit barely half a page. Before closing the envelope, she hesitated. Under the plane trees, students walked. Alberel read Gil Blas, while stirring his absinthe with the spoon, in a slow motion where his large ring reflected. A chill of morning freshness permeated the air. The sprinkler's jet pushed a spray of gemmed, sparkling, and ruby droplets into the sun. Water scents rose to the leaves. Suddenly, a race car roared by on the roadway, its 4 horses stopping against the curb at the obese postillon's cries. "After lunch we'll ride in one of these," Alberel said. The vehicle, high on wheels, long, covered with a fringed parasol cloth and golden on the iron horse escutcheons, was equipped with mustard-yellow velvet benches. A group of diamond-studded and lace-adorned women took their seats alongside some roughnecks. The fans stirred in front of painted faces. They made elegant gestures with their gloved hands, gray pearl colored with black spots. He cracked his whip, and the carriage descended into a blanket of sun where the toilets lit up. Finally, the postillon settled, his chest protruding from the scarlet ravers of his jacket. Laughter could still be heard for a long time amidst the jingling of the greased chains. Determined, Henriette closed the envelope of impatience to walk on the green path. She dared not refuse to have lunch otherwise. At the Restaurant Boulant, in the top room, she chose a table facing the ice cream. "Caviar?" The care to protect her new toilette from stains consumed her entirely. Nevertheless, she arranged her napkin in a way that would not reveal this bourgeois concern. Maurice asked. Yes, she replied. She ate little. The mirror showed her blonde face high-collared with red polka-dot linen. An antique medal, half-faded, made up a brooch. Her slender chest swelled into two distinct orbs. Then the ice frame cut off the image. But she always returned to her straw hat, a man's hat, flat and round with a wide white silk ribbon. This gave her a rugged yet charming look. From there, her golden blonde curls escaped, dispersed, becoming thin gold threads towards the window. Alberel projected things for their common life. They also spoke of Marceline and Fraisse. She with joyful expressions but deep anxiety over all. He joked and ridiculed these bourgeois. Very kind. He made an effort to please her, to relax the frown that always contracted the girl's smile. Fears plagued her. If he left too soon, in a few days, what shame! And what sorrow, too, for she seemed smitten. A vague apprehension of motherhood that would kill her happiness. Another reason for abandonment. To captivate this man, she set herself rules of conduct. By refraining from showing her affection, she would surely win him over. And suddenly, Maurice became an enemy to spy on without cease, to subjugate through constant battles. Hadn't she already taken a dislike to this tall brunette? She anticipated returning to the Fraisse shop, asking them to take her back. Tears welled up in her eyes. The golden lilies on the green tapestry blurred. Everything danced in the overflow of her tears. "What's wrong, I ask you?" he said. "Are you crazy? Because you left your little sister?" She forced a smile, wiping her lashes. Curious glances were already being cast at her, mocking. Alberel had to shoot fierce glances in that direction. A near-sighted gentleman adjusted his monocle to scrutinize her. "Oh, don't look so dreadful. You scare me," she said. They resumed talking about the duel. Then he introduced her to the practice of sport. Maurice considered himself not very enduring by nature, but he could bear anything from her alone. He took out a pile of newspapers and consulted the predictions. His pencil scratched names, noting others with a cross. They left the table. Having chosen his horses, he tucked the list into the case of his monocle. In front of the mirror, she noticed herself. And this sight gave her more confidence in the power of her beauty. They went out. She put on her long gloves, took her parasol and fan embroidered with birds. At the nearby tobacconist's, Maurice, while stroking cigars, talked to a coachman in impeccable livery. Henriette waited for him at the edge of the sidewalk, near a new Victoria whose gloss reflected her dress. Fresh rose buttons fastened to the noseband. A tiny groom in a coat similar to that of the coachman watched over a very fine horse that neighed and tried to kick, making the nickel fittings of its harness sparkle. With the coachman, Alberel advanced, a cigar between his lips. "How? Get in," he said to Henriette, pointing to the Victoria. He gestured, confirming his words. She sprawled on the blue cushions. He sat beside her. He threw his overcoat and lorgnette into the carriage. "How so? Is this crew yours?" "No, but I thought we'd be better off here than in those big buggies good only for ferrying English tourists." She opened her parasol. They headed towards the Arc de Triomphe. The gentle breeze snapped the ribbons of her sleeve and caressed her face. An unpredictable gesture that would repeat and then return. People sitting on the Champs-Élysées watched them drive by and followed them with admiring eyes. Soon they were caught up in a tangle of carriages. "Charming, this young couple," the lady remarked. A whole family sat in a landau. Babies, little boys, a mature lady accompanied them for a long time, smiling at them almost continuously. In this free praise they drew closer, and their fingers intertwined. Henriette felt a joy-drunkenness taking over. Her chest vibrated strangely. Before her, the greens of the forest and the clear gaps of narrow paths shaped themselves through perspectives. It was her old life, her life as a rich little girl. Thus she had come to the races with her father and sister, all still young. It seemed to her that these two periods of her existence were finally connecting. The workshop, the work at Fraisse, was now dispersed by this wicked interruption. Her letter would arrive soon to shock the world. She thought of Marceline riding on the Avenue de l'Opéra, Clémence stitching with Léontine and Marguerite. What faces they'd make! But wouldn't she herself face their anger? Bah! Maurice would defend her. He said nothing, content to not divert his gaze from her. If the lover appeared sincere, she would believe him at least for a time. The sun shone through the leaves. At the end of the avenue it was obscured by gray and blue mist. The coaches struggled towards that bright end of the green road. Longchamps appeared, the lawn where it buzzed black from the ivy mill to the brightly striped stands. Far away, bounded by trees breaking the sky, smooth stretches of grass, the waterfall roared its wide and diaphanous tear into the lake on the polished rocks. Slowly, the coaches pressed together like ships in the basin of a port. The cockades of the coachmen and the tassels of the bits shone among the intertwining of the thin whips. Down the slope, the mass of the coaches slipped slowly towards the mill. Henriette strained to stand rigid beneath the scarlet aureole of her parasol. Maurice tried to scrutinize with his magnifying glass the indicator numbers on the starting posts. They would only talk about sport now. And the afternoon passed in the feverish atmosphere of betting. Why don't you bet? After the second race, as Henriette put her hand in her pocket, she found a wallet full of louis that Alberel had slipped in without her knowing. He asked her. She won, she lost, then won again. Her chest would jump with each circular flight of the yellow, black, and red jockeys. Game over, said Alberel. I've won 400. And I've lost 12 francs. Sitting straight on the bench of the Victoria, she followed them, and the palpitations accelerated when, disappearing into the sea of spectators' heads, only their multicolored hats and the stirrings of people, suddenly turning to look at them, remained visible. Darn it, you didn't want to listen to me. He looked at his watch. By the way, the letters should be here now. Flute for them. They might leave me alone at the end. She considered herself very brave with her determination. The weight of the gold in her pocket made her proud. What wouldn't she do with it? One among the 1,000 queens who command fashion. Perhaps princes on vacation would love her. Would she leave Maurice, in that case? She dared not question it, and behind her extended fan, to pay her lover for this intentional ingratitude, she kissed him long and pitifully on the lips. She blamed herself for this bad idea that haunted her. Our word. Ander, a Beijing, a Barangway, Anrobe, Amur Wow, Anwayung, Adieu, and our, or Taushen, a Mayund, Orum, Tangwar, Aji, Kand, or Sat. At Sylvain's place, they dined together over champagne. She kissed him herself at every moment, to taste his warm lips from which her appetite never grew tired. It seemed to him that this was only a first degree of chic. Other richer ones, counts, would carry her to the peaks, and this made Maurice pitiable. And then seeing him happy with these caresses, she believed she was thus compensating for her mistake. But the certainty that she would inevitably leave him one day only became more firm. Without a reason for this, she would have wept at this fatal abandonment. But what could be done against the force of things? Chic. His mission, his goal, his duty. She saw it as a career, fame at the end, her name in the newspapers, a hotel, winters in Nice, the humid glances that targeted her on the turf. She still possesses them catalogued in her brain, along with the expressions of the gentleman. Oh, a horse would suit her, a long, dark Amazon, and a high-brimmed hat without even a veil. Among all, one on horseback, handsome, pulling gold from his trousers and casually giving it to bookmakers. On the pommel of his short cane, complex armorial bearings, they stroll along the promenade of Eden. Aljain Alwern, or Albig, and Harbling Altrin, Panelinganay, and among the red bulbs of monstrous columns pushing back the heavy crates from the skies, of circulating courtesans, and their false faces where eyes wander among the whites and circles of sketches. Under the intense moon of electric flames, others even more faded in the nacre of makeup, the indecisiveness of silks, and the blondes of dyes, culminate at the bars. For moments, they seem without relief, blurry lines of appearances that would terrify dreams. Immobilized in funeral costumes, waxen and severe faces of chaste dead are veiled. Immediately the redhead speaks. "Here you are, you others," Maurice says to Sicard and Clémence. "Oh, You don't know, Henriette. When your letter arrived, Mr. Frisse showed it to Marceline. Then she started crying. Mrs. Frisse had to come get her and bring her home. Ah, and Fraisse, what did he say? He came to find me. He told me that since I was your friend, I should talk to you. Do I know? A lot of stories, naturally. He said what you were doing was very wrong. Well, why did she always bore me? That's it. As for me, you know, I have nothing to say to you. You'll do as you please. Oh, for now, I can't go back in. Instinctively, they all four went and sat down away from the crowd, near a fountain. Henriette suffered to learn of her sister's great sorrow. A weight pressed on her chest, and she felt like crying. Come on, there's nothing to regret, Sicard preached. One day or another, you would have left your sister anyway. She praised it fold by fold. I hope you have a nice dress, Clemence said. Soon Henriette had to explain pin arrangements and pleats. She described the morning shopping. As Albarel spoke of the markets, she inserted her word, admitted her loss, and with the triumph of narrating her distinguished adventures of the day, she regained her joy. Sicard ordered champagne. The barmaid sat down near them and dispensed her banalities, revealing her stupidity in her first words. Remarks about the crowd, vague judgments on other pleasure spots compared to Eden. She adjusted her red curls or tugged at the lace of her bodice, revealing her damp breasts. Sicard displayed cold dishonesty. He spoke unkindly of her withered charms. Enough, madam, concluded Sicard. I've given my opinion on your dress. You should thank me and enjoy it. She retorted bitterly, without flinching, gazing at him through her monocle, impassive, serving him insults that the two young women puffed behind their fans. Enough, isn't it? They left the bar. Here's the change. Henriette and Clemence continued to repeat the insults addressed at the woman to provoke laughter. The priest's seriousness, when he spoke his nonsense, excited them. They only talked among themselves. The lovers debated stubbornly and barely responded with a monosyllable to intrusive questions. They pretended not to care about them anymore. The satisfaction of disgracing the girl's flaws consoled them for this indifference. Although Henriette secretly felt hurt, Henriette held a grudge against him. She even contemplated giving him a suitable lecture. Moreover, each time Albarel called his mistress, Sicard teased him, pulled his arm, and led him forward to share his exclusive chatter. They leaned against the circular balcony, but an absolute disdain for these maneuvers seemed more dignified. In their dark velvet, where toilette and scattered gentlemen fade, the rows of boxes descend towards the ramp, and then there emerged the hycenic clarity, the rose light that illuminates the palatial columns. On their chins, on their blushing smiles, on their hollow eyes glimmers, rose and green the luminous depth of the setting lined with the quadrilles of the dancers. Rose and green the luminous depth. The next day was a rainy Sunday. Indigo the stretched legs of the ballerinas, the legs stretched in a row, outside the round veils. Maurice and Henriette lingered in bed to talk. He made her tell her life story. From this narrative that showed her previously rich, he seemed saddened. Poor little one, you must have suffered greatly from working. Likewise, he painted his childhood life and games. Then the long torture in the university prison, the LAX and cruel pions, the imbecile professors always punishing, careful to avoid the task of educating. Henriette pitied him. He spoke of those dismal times with hatred. 10 years lived between the black prison walls, behind bars and iron gratings, and the unfortunate one, beaten by the strongest, numbed by endless tasks, she could not believe it. Albarel's youth, joys, an inheritance devoured in the Latin Quarter, a time when he owned horses, follies, stays in spa towns in the 30s and 40s, and one fine day, debts. The family settled them on condition that he lived near them. There he triumphed, a small-town cock. He was associated with his father's business, one of the most solid houses in Béziers. He organized pigeon shoots, subscription balls, a circle, a gym society, a band, a lyre commerciale. As he liked business, he joined his father's office with a bank. Galas were held. Adventurous and scandalous affairs with the wife of a country squire led him to break off a marriage. Back in Paris, He haunted the stock exchange for his father's account. His mother, a devout woman, no longer wanted to see him. As he narrated, Henriette felt an increasing affection welling up within her. She grew attached to the story of his misfortunes. She admired the elegance of his youthful days, and she derided the small town where he had reigned. Knowing him like that in his past, he seemed different to her, with a more intimate, almost familial allure, distinct from his masculine qualities and elegance. He would thus replace Marceline. She longed for a quiet life together in this apartment, towards a bourgeois haven of rest. She would resume her old habits, but with more comfort and brilliance. She got up and began to put things in order. She muffled the noises to keep him from being distracted. He unfolded an English newspaper that the concierge had slipped under the door, and, taking a dictionary, forced himself painfully to translate articles. In the small sitting room, she sat down to sew more buttons onto her corsage. Light rain fell gently onto the umbrellas and the muddy pavement. The tram's imperial car glided against the lowest windows, with the conductor buried in his blankets, and a cafe boy stood against the balustrade, his head protected by a white napkin. "We're going to Auteuil," Maurice declared as he entered, his face soapy and a razor in hand. "In this weather? I have to. You see, Paul Marsa is running in the third, and I just read some information about her. Well, maybe 1,000 francs worth of business." "How? Yes. Are you sure? Horses do interest you quite a bit, don't they?" "It's necessary. It's the big race." She thought, isn't sports just a pastime for him? He himself explained. "My parents, in short, abandoned me. I only get a small commission from stock trading. In the country, the phylloxera had ruined trade. Besides, everyone was in the same situation. His lucky bets covered the deficit. The 200 francs Sicard received each month from his father, and the 1,500 francs in allowances as a notary clerk, would not have been enough to pay for his meals, rent, tailor, and Clemence's dressmaker. He finished getting dressed. His confession surprised Henriette. Surely her expenses, which she had feared would increase, would be reduced. Sicard and Clemence came to pick them up. After lunch they got into a large carriage. The rain stopped for moments. In moments the wind pushed it under the protective canvas, and Albarel opened his umbrella on one side to protect their bench. Between the showers, the races succeeded one another, without interest to them. In Auteuil, the young men placed their mistresses in the grandstands. Then, dressed in long English greatcoats that covered their heels, they ran to the bookmakers' flags. Clemence spoke of love. She cited the adventures of all the workers employed by Freysa. In pairs, they were still best shared. The violet sky rolled above the dark woods. They did not see the young men again until late in the afternoon. They returned furiously and soaked. Hardly had they won 400 francs. At the last moment Paul Marsa, revealed, was mounted at unbelievable odds. "It's deplorable," exclaimed Sicard. The only affair of the month thus failed. Until the 20th, he would not run anything but old, well-known cows. Perhaps something can be attempted with Chrysantheme on the 17th. I will see Delwart. In any case, here we are with 400 francs so far. Madams, we will have to make cuts. This thought lingered in Henriette's mind throughout the journey. She once again found herself preoccupied with money issues. Bourgeois discomfort pursued her, even in this wild life. Economy, it sounded like an insult, a constant reminder of poverty. At Boulogne, there was the Sunday crowd. High school and Saint-Cyrien students, gesticulating with their kerchiefs. They hurried through their meal at the narrow table, shoulders hunched over from elbow-to-elbow neighbors. In the cafe it was just as crowded, exacerbated by strolling flyers disgusted by the rain, taking shelter behind an endless beer stein. A large woman made unpleasant comments about them girls, and questioned her husband on how well-mannered young people could get lost with these little pests. Outside the rain poured down. The whole town, brown and empty, only the glints of gold from the street lamps were visible. Gold ran in long, lost threads on the sidewalks. "Let's go to your place," said Sicard to Albarel. "I've had enough of the grocers and the rowdies. Time passed playing cards and drinking tea." Henriette was much more bored than she'd been on Sunday evenings at the Frey's house, and the new existence soon became monotonous. The operettas were the same way. Unfortunately, the same play was performed 300 times in a row. As for the rest, dull things full of demonstrations, as well as instructors' classes, she liked only the farces at the theaters. One left there very joyful, slightly lascivious. One enjoyed for 8 days repeating the intonations of Lasouche and Baron. This became the gray routine every day. A whole house cleaning to do before dressing. Risings at 10 o'clock in a messy room among the scattered bowls. The concierge is cleaning the small parlor. One can hear the scrapes of her broom on the baseboards and the dry rustling of her feather duster. This first ablution eases Henriette of her amorous ache. She unclenches her eyelids and the corners of her lips, and the woman brings hot water and polished boots with a discreet, grave expression, as a virtuous woman offended by the tools of vice. Oh, to be longward oiled with this cascading, perfumed water of vetiver. You'll never finish. Quickly, quickly, little one, Maurice cries. 1:15. He, in a minute, is ready. Barely out of bed, he already has his pants and shoes on. His entire head disappears beneath the fluffy lather. 2 strokes of the razor on his right cheek, 2 on his left, and 2 under his chin, and he rubs his face with his white, soapy hand. Henriette cannot help but watch him. He wipes himself faster still. The brushes sweep through his black hair with a mechanical sound. The sportsman's muscular and smooth arms contract in bundles as he rubs himself vigorously. And beneath the tight flannel, the hard points of his nipples protrude. Suddenly he throws them onto the sink, revealing his face framed by flattened hair, short and shaved sideburns. Henriette contemplates him, her heart pounding. He files his nails and the sun glides pinkly through his delicate hand. Then they yearn to embrace each other in the pleasant scent of their perfumed skin. Rolling her onto the bed, he uncovers her breasts and warms them with his lips. It's 1:30. Henriette jumps, taut. She barely saves her chest from the lustful hands while she fastens her corset. Finally dressed, they go to the salon to gaze at each other in the large mirror. She places her hand on his arm. For a long time they admire and kiss each other, happy to see one another. We are very chic, aren't we? Oh, yes, we are very chic, you know. Every morning this judgment pleases them. They come down merrily. However, as the restaurant maid lays out the napkins and cutlery before them, they discuss the menu. Henriette's appetite never tempts her to choose one dish over another. She seeks the surprise. She dislikes things she has little taste for. She eats lunch mainly out of habit. She loves caviar, shrimp, oysters, and prawns, students and women. Do you come to class? Sometimes a young man comes to shake Albarel's hand. And then there is the joy of this large green and gold room, where crystals and ceramics sparkle, where sunlight filters through. Maidservants go in and out with their bib aprons, their canvas sleeves, the little gauze bonnet perched atop their twist, where it seems to defy gravity. This afternoon? Yes. What is there? Bijard's lesson. He will speak about the excavations in Assur and make a reconstruction. Good, I'll go. An explanation of cuneiforms on a cylinder seal. You know, the Arabic course ends on the 15th. Impossible? And the exam? September 1st. I'll have to study hard. The exam will be competitive, right, for the Doutremel expedition. I think so. Goodbye. Goodbye. A light nod from the gentleman to Henrietta, and he sits down further away. How sad these afternoons spent alone during class hours. On the table, piles of books and archaeological brochures. The small salon, its blue velvet couch, the wicker chairs with red pom-poms, an air of modest comfort that stretches out in the sun. Quickly closed, these dull volumes. It would then be decorated. From this work, Albarel hopes for a government mission in Asia at a later date. If Henriette opens them, it's only architectural plans that mean nothing to her. Sometimes a reproduction of Cypriot terracotta, pink-faced little men with curly beards and pointed mitres, riding fantastical mounts. Towards this, his ambition yearns. Pass by the brewery girls in embroidered aprons, a bag at their side, and chrome hair. Polytechnic students struggle to put on their gloves, and their swords, they cast them aside with an ungracious leg movement. Blue-yellow curtains of reps are opened on the balcony where Henriette stands and leans, her gaze towards the street. They raise their bearless, smiling faces towards her, but she turns her head away. A gesture, if she wanted, and they would be happy. With such young ones, what funny parts? She can't. Oh! Sudden, among the crowd, she recognizes Albarel, who shows her a large bouquet of camellias he bought for her. And there he is at the door where she ran, and there she is on his lips as he lifts them to hers. Pandora, Pangshu. In the evening, in the cafe's entresol, Henriette idly stares at the images in the periodicals. Women enter the room, their toilets exquisite. Around the tables, groups gather and crowd together amidst the smoke of cigars. Clear are the figures of the young women standing against the tapestries where unicorns crawl, scarlet. Clear beneath the pointed peak of their lace hats, and gracefully fall their slender arms, their round, thin arms, against the orbs of their full chests. Here and there their steel-like eyes dart. Here and there their floral mouths smile. The brown faces of the Orientals smoke in white corsets without words, and immobile lines beneath the blue hair. The tapestry, velveted, where scarlet unicorns crawl. In the cold and deep reflections of the ice, women, Orientals, and scarlet unicorns blend with the shimmering gas. The Orientals' smooth tints and grave gestures of masters captivate Henriette. "Listen a moment," Albarel says, pushing her towards a corner and lowering his voice. He gently chides her for her attentive gazes at men. Why? He has noticed this tendency to scrutinize them before. If she doesn't love them, they won't believe her easygoing nature. Disagreements will follow for both of them. She bristles and twists with sharp words and sulky looks, a rage from being caught and guessed in the very moment of fault. There reveals a superiority of her lover that she cannot forgive. He dominates her, spies on her, and knows her silent thoughts. Who do you take me for? Thus, as a cowardly indiscretion and a violation of conscience, she would reproach him for this too perceptive surveillance. Oh, but it won't last like this. Then the lover's voice changes and becomes harsh. He will not be played with. From the day he took her, a moral responsibility was upon him. He has the right and the duty to reprimand. For him, she would never suffer ridicule. If their common liaison weighs on her, let her say just one word, and he will return her freedom with money. Then he clenches his fists in his temples. Unmindful of Henriette's scornful looks, he leans over a review. As the promise of money was blown away. Whore, she was a whore. Albarel spoke like Marceline, and even more brutally. Why are you so sad, Henriette? Everything in front of her trembled and wavered through her tears, held back by a supreme effort of pride at the corner of her eyes. She confides her sorrows to this good Clemence. The other one also lists hers. They suffer the same shame, the same embarrassment, the same desire to be, not to just exist, to not crawl among the crowd of temporary companions. Clemence would like a beautiful shop, workers, customers, a beautiful shop on Rue de la Paix or Boulevard Malesherbes. While mocking these modest desires, Henriette approves. They gossip and share desires and the discomfort of never being able to realize them. Albarel and Sicard talk politics. Castellan refutes them with a thrown-off word while he writes. He is so intelligent. And suddenly, Henriette and Clemence begin praising the journalist quietly. A boy with a future. The one he will love will be happy. A woman would bother him. Yes, but he will never settle, replies the redhead. He is too ambitious. And Hortense? Oh, a brewery girl, Dutch. He doesn't care. She goes with 36 others. Hortense suddenly appears. With painted lips, she laughed at their gallantries. As soon as Castellan abandoned his writings, men who seemed affable made an effort. By brief gestures, she commanded the structure of her yellow-dyed hair, and from expressions towards the ice, very close to Hortense, Albarel and Sicard began playing hand games with her, a lustful desire in their eyes and fingers. In the corner, Clémence and Henriette remained apart. Far from their lovers who pretended not to see them, they resumed their accusations. The girl felt her heart beat, tears welling up, as Maurice's indifference became more apparent. Deep down, they care. But her friend said, "Go, they always come back to us. You shouldn't get so upset." To Henriette, it seems like a complete vengeance for the suffered shame would be achieved if, leaving Albarel who neglects her, she could enjoy a special and grandiose luxury, public joy in the arms of another more beautiful, richer, and whom he would envy. Castellan recites to Hortense a sonnet written for her. The rhymes ring out of his eloquent, kind, and smiling mouth. It would be the lowering of his pride, the affirmation of inferiority. He might have pleased for a moment through error, and because he was very young. Henriette admires him still. His white fingers scan the verses with a soft and rhythmic movement. She would dearly love these verses to be addressed to her. The poet perhaps noticed this contemplation. Now, at the end of each verse, he looks at her. Well. Henriette blushes and turns to Clémence. Einwirl, June. Worn, Ages. On the walls of the girls' cabarets, and men of war, in the style of yesteryear, ride through stained glass between columns inscribed with proverbs. Iron lustrous gas escapes, and its warm glows sink into the polished table mirrors. Against the green curtains of the high seats twine dense trees. Blue plates reflect the golden light in orbs. Tambourines gleam, illustrated by elementary school paintings of regulars. Naked clay naiads smile on the walls of the girls' cabarets. Cigar smoke lingers. And drunkenness takes hold, the drunkenness of people sprawled over women. Henriette sips champagne. Hortense kisses it. Castellan reads her fortune in her hand, and his well-manicured nails tickle her, from her shoulders down to her elbows. The diffuse gas, its warm glows, and the stagnant smoke where women's pearly teeth reflect, fade away. June. That night, reconciliation between the two lovers took place. There were very tender prayers and protests. He pleaded with her not to cause him pain. If he accused her, it was because he adored her whole, wanted her entirely his own. To these delicacies of passion, she, kind as she is, would surely be able to sympathize. In the lace of her soft arms, she weeps repentantly, confessing to herself more guilty than he believes. A fatalism pushes her, it seems, towards illicit caresses. Irresistibly, she envisages herself in lace and pearls, paid for by her flesh. They chatted. Once, passing by the brewery where Hortense served, she found her at the door. "Come in. There's no one here. If you knew how I'm bored." Henriette, encouraged by frank confessions, expressed her desires for a more official, more luxurious life. Often Henriette returned. Then the other gave advice, sketched out a conduct according to age and the appearance of men. Albarel suffered a black, unlucky streak on the turf. Perhaps the matter would have been settled. Hortense proposed to connect her with a reliable gentleman, a repentance in advance of the shame and despair she had caused. At the decisive hour, what mad fear surprised her, a tearful fear of leaving Maurice and never tasting his lips again. One afternoon, having had the bath towels returned, she dressed in white lace, the only luxury she still possessed. She hesitated for a moment, blushing. She spent a long time styling her hair, and then sat on the balcony with a book in hand. In the street, Castellan, in his carriage, saluted, and by signs he asked if he could join her. Finally, she agreed. "You don't know, Henriette," he cried. "Albarel has been admitted. I just heard him answer very well to the 3 parts of the examination." And as he climbed up, she suspected a violation, a fault Hortense and Albarel deceived, all the emotions of a passionate crime. "Dress quickly. We're going to look for him." His father arrived. What a wedding. He gave her 2,000 francs and left that evening. To prepare new toiletries, the intense joys of her affair returned. Blue pebbles that crumble beneath your feet. The day after tomorrow, Maurice and Henriette set off for Dieppe with 3 suitcases. white fringe of the sea. It swells, recedes, foams, and then crumbles. A plain of intensely blue water that continues in the sky, a color of pale water. 13 in Castellan's room, and the sky bends, returns to frolicking around the casino's pavilions, to the buzz of the crowd, to the white cabins. Candles flicker among cheap oil lamps, among piles of books. On the sofa. How wrong it is. Hard, her bust bent over the sacrum, legs stretched in a compass shape, Henriette daydreams. Scruples and after-alls alternate and tug at her conscience. This poor Maurice, she's going to betray him while he mopes there in his province. Yet her curiosity, until now monogamous, intensifies into the desire for new and illicit caresses. The Castellan approaches her with words of love, his lips offered, and, mocking her laughter with a sharp sound, it is the sudden caprice of the young girl. "What's come over you?" he asks, baffled. "Me? Nothing," she replies. And in her daydream, Henriette plunges back into it. He tries to embrace her, but she gives him significant rebuffs. "No, no, leave me alone." Castellan pouts and goes near the open crosspieces. He smokes while gazing at the moon. Then Henrietta takes a rhyme dictionary from her work table, and, with a heady voice, she reads, Vauban, Laban, Lebanon, Montauban torta. Amadis, cadetes, cadix, de profundis. The journalist breaks into laughter, approaches her, picks her up, and kisses her full on the mouth. The skirts whisper down onto the carpet. The corsage is unbuttoned. He holds her very heavily, like an inert object, in his arms of love, and Henrietta allows herself to be lowered. Her eyelids closed, a teasing smile playing on the corners of her lips, making a big pout. The door to the bed. They know each other, free from the constraints of scales. Among the sharp breasts where the bust has left its marks, the hair flows in gold. Castellan's skilled fingers have undressed Henriette. I'll borrow. I'll and feel. 2 hours ring out from the nearby campanile. On her elbow, turning away from her lover, Henriette is absorbed in reading a book, it seems. Indeed, she is thinking. True, it was wrong to deceive Maurice. What a disillusionment. She will never love this man. A caprice, at most. The journalist's literary chatter had promised revelations. What a mistake. Even now she finds him insipid. Castellan grows impatient with her coldness. In gentle caresses, he dares. No, no, growls Henriette, and from her loins she struggles. 14 Thard. For weeks, Henriette has been intimately connected with Mrs. Gandon. Her apartment. A mezzanine with low, inviting ceilings. 33 years old, petite with an androgynous torso, and the facial epidermis dull, and eyes like 2 large black pearls, and nose twitching, and ears in delicate curls, and her ambiguous mouth, the gallant Lady Iphigenie Gandon. There. Walls covered in fabrics with dark bouquets, and cushions on soft furred carpets, as well as cushions on exposed chairs and erotic arms, and cushions arranged on attentive divans. Among bottles of strong liqueurs and plates of delicacies, Governess Gudule wanders. The clever perruquier Leopold praises his beauty Theriax, but her friend, Madame Gandon, would like to pick the flowers that sometimes wither. FTMV. Jewish banker Jacobi with his goatee, Lord Sinclair with his neck tied in incarnadine, former Dutch burgomaster Van der Voort and his sour face, Roger de Schilly, never weary, the assiduous of Henriette. In favor of Mr. Fraisse, Marceline nearly failed. So strong was her disgust for things, people, and herself. So distressing was this shame. The sudden decline of Henriette robbed her of all faith in her own virtue. A person of such high birth, enslaved by intelligence to the same principles, could thus fall to the rank of prostitutes with an unexpected blow of madness. Certainly their fate as poor workers destined them to appear supported, and to become so. Nothing could free her from this obsession. The embroiderers, she saw them in the evening, joining lovers at the end of the sidewalk. Mr. Fraisse made even greater efforts to please her. He even had familiarities that, by instinct, she pushed away. She began to call herself an idiot. Why resist alone, aware of life, now especially? Who would marry her, a sister of a daughter? Then she brooded on her rejections, for the patron's kindness seemed all the more precious. At the first shock of her sorrow, she had feared to lose it, thanked for the slightest pretext that terrible poverty would have befallen her. Better, at the cost of her body, to conquer the certain association, wealth. And then something inexplicable drew her towards that man. She acknowledged his gratitude for his gentle consideration, which excused Henriette. Shame would have been reflected back at her. Silently, she repeated the sordid reproaches that could justifiably be expressed. Mrs. Frayser, less good, did not keep quiet about her rancor towards the evil girl, but her husband's voice immediately became moved, and sadly whispered vague accusations against the seducer. Then, after all, perhaps he loves her sincerely. They might marry one day. It has happened before. The little one is distinguished, educated. A child's foolishness is what they are doing there. You see, love is still one of the best things in life. Soon, out of discretion, the adventure was no longer mentioned before Marceline. She herself found herself dreaming for hours, without her mind wandering. The house thrived. The association projects were confirmed once again, all the business secrets revealed. The cashier's duties were expanded to include her sisters. Like a persistent teasing that the young girl vowed to overcome, she became more accepting of advances and compliments. Leontine, now a supervisor, only retained from this high position and honorary title the right to indulge in treats for the workers, and a pretext to frequently join the boss to seek advice. How Marceline grew irritable, seeing this large girl press her powdered cheek against Mr. Frayser's face, as if wanting to know exactly the texture of the fabric he was examining. Mrs. Frayser devoted herself entirely to her sick little girls. She would run the household during this absence, perhaps quite long. For the fall, she had to take them to Algeria, where their uncles managed an alfalfa plantation. It was agreed that around that time, Marceline would have a room at the store, and then definitively settle on Avenue de l'Opéra. Like that you would be our daughter entirely, Mrs. Frayser added one evening after dinner. The conclusion of this speech intimidated the husband. Mrs. Frayser kissed Marceline. His eyes, after fixing for a moment on the young girl, quickly looked away. Marceline was disturbed. He spoke this all pale from a sudden pallor. He said, "I love you a lot. See, and I value you just as much. I will do everything in my power to make you happy, to marry a brave boy who makes life easy for you." She felt he was making a tremendous effort to speak of such things. His wife asked him if he wasn't sick. His low, trembling voice admitted in advance his jealousy of the future he proposed. "I don't feel well," he replied. "I'm going to smoke a cigar outside." He went out. The noise from the avenue was deafening. On the yellowed gas table, the liqueur glasses and cups had a soft glow. The little ones, a bit drowsy, with soft smiles on their pink lips, lay on their knees, in the arms of their friend. Mrs. Frayser counted the small vermeil spoons and closed the drawer. The long, pale and clear hair and the white dresses made a large shroud spot in the dark room, with its green curtained drapes. Then, sitting down, she began to recite her misfortunes, not without having filled 2 tiny hanaps with curacao. "Yes, they come from me, poor dears," she said. "That didn't heal me. I've always been like this, weak and sick. At the convent they treated me with iron. However, I had become strong enough when I got married. But my first layer made me very sick for a long time. Since the second, I have a stomach ache that needs to be operated on twice a year." She praised her husband. With admirable care, he nursed her. And yet it shouldn't have pleased him, so young still, to have a sickly wife. Marceline thought her old. She admitted she was 35. She continued, "We had our children very late. Emile wanted a boy. I only gave him these poor weaklings." Lost in her daydreams, Marceline stopped listening. This praise for Mr. Frayser moved her to the extreme. Now her woman's heart ached, causing her pain. It occupied her mind with his own gesture, quick and sure, his pointed beard a la mode of old lords, and his gray eyes where she read a frank passion for herself. But didn't everything announce a happier mystery that, once known, bound with the charm of new and soft delights? Then the desire to conquer this big Leonine, to triumph, to secure a rich future. Also for very tender soul caresses, smooth skin where they would mix, and a gap. Her chaste ignorance stopped her. Mrs. Frace's next departure appeared to her as hope. She relished it. At least she masked her great love-longing with this practical motive. Yet amongst the various most reasonably educable conjectures aimed at happiness, she always returned to the persuasion of giving herself to acquire the indispensable power. Then, realizing that she was lying to herself, sobbing rages overwhelmed her. She did not console herself for her soul's weakness, that weakness which had lost Henriette, that same weakness which was losing her too. Rather, he seemed to avoid her. With the family gone, Mr. Frese did not press himself upon Marceline. At the table, he maintained the conversation on business, even asking the cashier to take this time to explain the commercial events that had occurred. He spoke of Jacques Plauert, his traveler in the East, with insistence, and read aloud his descriptive letters from the Levant countries where this man collected ancient carpets. Mr. Frese showed his photograph, an oval face, large eyes, stiff hair, a turned-down collar, and a pretty frizzy beard. Jacques Plauert, engaged in the artillery very young, had quickly risen to the rank of non-commissioned officer. A misfortune, the breech of a cannon exploding during a test firing of the piece, left him mangled of the left arm. He let it be known that an interest in the house had been acquired by the traveler for 3 years already. Similarly, Marceline held a share. One could seduce him by doubling this share if she wanted the alliance of that intelligent boy. Calculated the probable benefits in proportion to their contribution, the company would be transformed in 2 years at most. Altogether, they would work to perfect the common fortune, which, given the current movement of ideas and luxury, would not take long to become very important. Always enthusiastic, the merchant explains and throws the numbers into the air with a bold gesture. He smiles, walks, advances, and retreats. From time to time, he wipes his lips with his handkerchief and adjusts his bifocals. But one must first know if Mr. Plauert, objects Marceline, perplexed. She hates Mr. Frese for this persistence in offering her the life of another, so he scorns her. As she would like to tell him to stop this pretense, and that he tortures her, she dares not, and her heart jumps at the clawing of pain. The eagerness, the attentions, it was all just a decoy, a mad desire to fall into the embrace of this lover, and let these tears that tear his eyelids escape, these tears that would confess. Yet she feigns coldness. He continues his explanations. She gazes at the pale light of the avenue where the rapid parade of carriages flickers. She repeats, "Will I please him at least? What do you know? But you'll please whoever you want to, Marceline. I, a married man, a family father, almost did foolish things for you. You didn't suspect it, did you, with your cold and simple face? It's over. Yes, laugh. I called myself an old fool. I've mastered myself. I no longer love you any more than one should love their own daughter. Believe me, Mary Plauert. I want to make you happy, to remove from your mind the ugly sadness that this scatterbrained Henrietta has put there. By Jove, I understand that you've never seemed moved by me, but what the devil, for a handsome boy like Jacques. Oh, he has a missing arm, your handsome young man. How cruel of you." And he left. She followed his gaze into the labyrinth of passers-by. For an instant, he stopped under a street lamp, pulled out a notebook from his pocket, and consulted it. He hailed a cab, climbed in. Then his thin head appeared fully illuminated with glints in the glasses of his monocle, and the cab disappeared into the violet mist. "I'll rewire it doing, Ortmal. For days and nights, Marceline pondered. Regrets, memories. She re-experienced all her love so fatally misunderstood due to this coldness. If only she had smiled at such a word, perhaps everything would have turned out differently. When did this primary idea of this passion originate? She probed her memory. Horrified, she discovered base origins: greed, vanity, weariness. Gradually, the idea had become master. The evident merits of Mr. Frese had conquered her. And then, at the moment when Henrietta's reproaches revealed the tales of the seamstresses, she suddenly knew the truth. As long as stubbornly clinging to her austere virtue, she guarded herself against his attempts, Mr. Frese wove tendresses to seduce her. On the contrary, At that very instant when she had violated his honor, sudden scruples held her back, for she understood the sensitivity of the man who, seeing her alone, unprotected, in his home after Mrs. Freyce's departure, did not want to shame her. Then, within herself, the pain grew accustomed and fell asleep. She regarded it as a mercy that she had not revealed the miserable secrets of her soul, that she had suffered inwardly and triumphed. Having acquired the certainty that Leontine would reach, or perhaps had already reached, the physical intimacies of the merchant, her regrets and love despair dissipated. She praised herself for her prudence. At the same time as this crude one, it would have served as a toy, and Mr. Freyce considered him an inexcusable waste of talent if he did not possess this art of trade. One morning, she waited for Jacques Plowert. The suitable party. Like a favorable deadline, a commercial date that would change the routine of the house and give the business a new direction. For intelligence, she knew him to be a bachelor, a skilled writer, an eloquent describer, a man of taste. His submissions always charmed the clients, and did not remain in stock. For physique, his photographs showed a robust young man with feminine features, where a smooth skin was evident, and his clear eyes were rounded. The martial idea of his wound mitigated the repugnant aspect of his deformity. A plastic male, finally, tall, and such as the stone gods of the Louvre, Mr. Freyce said. A suitable party. Even she did not feel any curiosity about the supreme embraces, but the study of high commercial speculation absorbed her. From there, she turned her mind, very calm, thinking that she knew a definite time when this would not teach anything too strange, as every woman without difficulty conformed to it. She read economic treatises, completed her knowledge on banking and credit systems. By money, she forced any ruined man to marry this miserable Henriette. This marriage promised her the rise to secure wealth, where she would live, amidst the swinging luxurious crews, in reverence among financiers and engineers. Afterwards, nothing more would be desired. Jacques Plowert came. He came one afternoon. She recognized him at once before he entered, and even though he first offered only his right side to view, only leaner than the photographs represented him, he said particular and interesting things. The sound of his voice, she had anticipated it. At table discussing commerce, the engaged couple immediately felt at ease, as if they had been united for years. With great skill, using his single hand, he cut the pieces with a curved pocket knife. Suddenly, he burst into laughter. Then his knuckle jumped inside the too-wide sleeve, a pointed thing that pleated the fabric of his redingote. For the first time, Marceline felt a repulsion, the urge to see that bit of member shiver naked, to disgust herself and flee. And this thought obsessed her. What attitude should she take so that her gaze never collided with it? She dared not lift her eyes for fear of seeing that pointed thing shivering in laughter. Like a living beast, distinct from the person, endowed with a separate existence, sometimes languid, immobile in sad torpor, or trembling with an awful dance. She could not distract herself from the fantastic vision. All words became mute until Jacques left. In his absence, she kept in her memory the disturbing and repulsive image. It prevented her from sleeping for hours. Terror. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed that the stump pursued her, pressing a viscous and hot kiss to her lips, while Jacques burst into an awful laugh, revealing his white teeth. She no longer dared to be alone. If Jacques arrived, this horror would lessen slightly. The hallucination grew, suggesting the 1,000 ridiculous scenes of penguins, the horror of cut and bloody chairs. The smooth, new sheet of his clothing draped the thing in black. To avoid confronting the horrible appearances predicted by her nightmares, she found solace, and her mind rested in relative comfort. To escape from this absurd haunting, she tried to envision the young man as he should have appeared before the accident. She could never restore the martial posture of the gunner in his uniform. Always, the empty and floating sleeve, the black sleeve, imposed itself upon her mind. She could not bring herself to agree to this marriage. The single apprehension that it would touch her flesh, that she would one day see him naked, filled her with horror and chills. As Mr. Freyce questioned her, she answered resolutely, no. Then she confessed her repulsions, the unbearable discomfort that this man caused her. I know it's foolish. It's crazy, she said, but I can't help it. I just can't do it. Mr. Fraisse was very unhappy with this refusal. However, he did not renew his request. A few days later, Jacques Clauer left for India. He didn't seem otherwise sad. To Marceline, he offered very kind farewells. Deep down, the young girl regretted it. He could have so easily fulfilled her hopes. For a long time, she blamed herself for her evil imagination that had taken hold of her. Nevertheless, on further requests, her answer would not have varied. The autumn rains poured down the avenue. On the balconies, the eternal smile of golden signs shone. The fiacres drive onto the polished sidewalks. The gray sky drains into the dark roofs. Dijon, sitting behind the ebony counter, she watches the white water dust while her fingers caress the soft vellum of the register. Marceline watches the white water dust flying close to the asphalt, fleeing and dying. The white waters that pass through the spaces between the dark people, drying on the silk of the umbrellas, fading into thin glimmers on the glass of the theft. Street lamps. Darentière, Rue Jabot-Charny, 65 Dort.